How we doing? So we're back for another episode of Day 5. So I think we're going to try to shimmy on through the rest of Day 5 with this one and just make it a two-parter. Don't know what we got for the last half of the day. First day, half of the day was pretty exciting, pretty interesting. Got some things. If you don't know, go back and watch. Don't be lazy. It's been fun. It's been real. Well, let's get into it, shall we? All right. You may proceed.
Okay.
Could you state your name for the record, please, sir?
Jonathan Manalo.
And could you spell your last name?
Manalo.
Are you married, sir?
Yes.
How long have you been married? I always make a mistake when I ask that.
7 years.
Thank you. And do you have any kids?
Yes.
A daughter?
Yes.
Okay. What do you do for a living, sir?
I work for UPS.
And
Hold on. It's going to bother me.
could you spell your last name?
Manalo.
Are you married, sir?
Yes.
How long have you been married? I always make a mistake when I ask that.
7 years.
Thank you. And do you have any kids?
Yes.
A daughter?
Yes.
Okay. What do you do for a living, sir?
I work for UPS.
And how long have you been at that job?
20 years.
I'm not going to ask you about your current address, but do you live in Seminole County, Florida, sir?
Yes.
Okay. How long have you lived in Seminole County, Florida?
About 32 years.
I want to draw your attention back to February of 2012. Were you living at 2861 Retreat View Circle?
Yes.
Okay. And at that time, how long had you lived in that residence?
Approximately 3 years.
Okay. I want to focus on Sunday, February the 26th of 2012. Were you home at around 7:05, 7:10, 7:15 p.m.?
Yes.
I can't.
And was anyone home with you?
Yes.
Who was home?
My wife and my daughter.
Okay. What were you all doing?
My wife was sitting on the couch and I was on the floor with my daughter assembling a coffee table we had purchased earlier in the day.
Your wife has already testified about the layout of your residence back in February of 2012. My question to you is, sir, do you recall in terms of outside the residence, was it dark outside at that time?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall the weather conditions
Which
that evening?
one was
Yes.
this morning?
And what were they?
It was raining.
Now, at around 7:10 p.m. or so, did you hear something outside?
Yes.
Could you describe to the jury what you first heard?
It sounded like grunts. We thought at first it was a couple of dogs barking.
And were the grunts, as you described, loud or low?
They were loud enough that I could hear it through the window, but it was still indistinct. I couldn't make anything out of it.
Okay. Did your wife do something?
Yeah, she looked through the window.
Okay. And when she was looking through the window, did you tell her anything about whether she should be looking through the window or not?
Yes, I said, stay away from the window. Don't make it our problem.
Okay. Did she pay attention to you?
Yes.
Okay. Did you yourself ever
Let's have
actually
mind your
look out the
business,
window?
woman.
No,
Did your wife look out the window several times that evening?
I believe so.
Okay. And in terms of what you recall her saying as she was looking out the window or right after, did she describe something going on outside?
She just said that there were two people fighting, and she sat down, and I think it was around the time she heard the yelling or the gunshot was when she peered through the window.
Okay. Did you yourself hear that gunshot?
Yes.
Okay. I know at some point you ended up going outside, but did you yourself actually ever look through the window to the sliding glass door outside?
No.
In terms of when you heard the gunshot, did you take any action after hearing the gunshot?
I went outside.
Okay. If you could tell the jury how you would have gone outside, through the back, the sliding door, did you take another route?
I went through the garage.
Okay. And in going through the garage, did you grab anything on your way out?
A flashlight.
After you went out through the garage, where did you go and what route did you take to get to where you saw something?
I went to the left toward the sidewalk, and then I just walked towards the back to the T.
Okay. When you got back there, did you see a man standing on the sidewalk?
Yes.
Okay. And did you know that man prior to that night?
No.
Okay. And do you know that person now to be George Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see that person in the courtroom today, sir?
Yes.
Is that the person that just stood up for purpose of the record?
Yes.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness that identified defendant George Zimmerman?
The record will so reflect.
When you first saw him, was the defendant standing up or sitting down or laying down?
He was walking towards my direction.
And did he walk directly towards you, or did he stop, or what happened?
He walked directly towards me.
Okay. Now, did you have your flashlight? Did you have it illuminating or on?
Yes.
Okay. And was it dark outside?
Yes.
When you observed the defendant, did you say he walked towards you?
Yes.
Did he have anything in his hands when you observed him?
As I came around the corner, I noticed that he had his cell phone to his left ear.
Okay. And was he holding it just to his ear?
Yes, it looked like that.
Okay. And when you say up to his left ear, can you demonstrate?
Like this.
Okay.
You had it like this.
Did you notice any blood on him, sir?
Yes.
And where did you notice the blood?
Down his nostrils, streaming down both sides of his lips, I believe. Of his lips.
Could you tell whether there was any damage to his nose, sir?
No.
And did you subsequently also see some blood on the back of his head?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sir, did you end up taking some photographs
Skip right
using your
over
cell phone?
that.
Yes.
Okay. Specifically, did you take a photograph of the back of his head?
Yes.
Did you take a photograph of the person you now know has been identified as Trayvon Martin on the ground?
Yes.
And did you also take a photograph of a flashlight that was on the ground?
Next to the body, yes.
Okay. Now, I apologize. It was two flashlights. There was one big flashlight next to the body that you photographed?
Yes.
Okay. Did you use your cell phone to take those photographs?
Yes.
And did you take, using your cell phone, did you use the flash from the cell phone, or did you use the flashlight you had with you?
I used the flashlight.
I'm going to ask you to, if you could, look at over here to the wall to your, thank you, Your Honor. Let me just, setting up where you lived at that time, back in February of 2012, showing you for the purpose of the record, State's Exhibit 1, that's been introduced into evidence. This is a Google or aerial photograph of the retreat of Twin Lakes. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to hopefully get this to work and show you the area that I'm going to focus on. Would your residence be right here where I'm pointing to, sir?
Yes.
Okay. The route you took, you said you went out the garage. Did you take this walkway that I'm
Yes.
pointing the aerial and go back to the back here?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately when you came into contact with the defendant, when he was walking towards you, where approximately you would have had contact with him? And I'm going to move the arrow around and you tell me where to stop.
A little higher.
Higher?
At the T.
Right here?
Yes.
Okay. Showing you State's Exhibit number 3. Can you see your residence from that photograph, sir?
No.
Okay. State's Exhibit 3, in terms of how dark it was, is this area that I'm pointing to here establish how dark it was out there?
Yes.
Okay. State's Exhibit number 5, does that photograph in any way depict part of your residence, sir?
Yes.
And what part of your residence does that show?
The back patio.
Okay. And am I pointing the area to it?
Yes.
This light that's on, was that on when the shooting and this happened, or was that turned on after?
That was off and it was turned on after.
And is this the area approximately where you came into contact with the defendant, George Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay, near where the T is or the dog trash receptacle?
Yes.
State Exhibit number 6. Would this have been your back porch or the pavement that's been described as like the back porch of your residence?
Yes.
Okay. State Exhibit number 10. What does that photograph show, sir?
Shows the back of my house, the T.
All right. And is this the area you came walking out of when you came into contact with the defendant?
Yes.
State Exhibit number 11. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. What does that photograph show, sir?
The back of the house and where the crime scene finally ended.
Okay. When you came out there, were all these markers out there when you first came out?
No.
Okay. Were you the first person after the shot that came into contact with anybody out there, the defendant and the victim on the ground?
Yes.
Okay. In other words, were there police officers out there when you came out there?
No.
Did the police officers arrive subsequently to you being out there?
Yes.
Okay. State's Exhibit number 34. Do you recognize what that is?
Looks like the front of the house.
Okay. And that would have been your residence back in February of 2012?
Yes.
And State's Exhibit 35, is that showing just a close-up of that area?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 37, that's a daytime photograph. Does that show the area that you've been talking about?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 40, tell us what that photograph shows, sir.
The sidewalk towards the T.
Okay.
That's where I had taken the path to the back.
When you left out from the garage, you would have taken this route this way?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. State Exhibit 76, did you take this photograph, sir?
Yes.
Now, it was raining that night, was it not, you said?
Yes.
And do you recall the position that you would have taken this photograph? Obviously, it shows the back of the defendant, Mr. Zimmerman's head. Was he sitting down, standing up, or how was he?
He was squatting.
Okay. And was that after the officers came?
This was before.
Okay. State Exhibit 77, what does that photograph show?
I believe that's Trayvon Martin.
Is this the way you found the victim, in this case, Mr. Martin's body?
Yes.
Did you move the body at all?
No.
When you observed Mr. Martin's body, his hands were underneath his body, is that correct, his torso?
Yes.
Did you tamper or mess with that at all? In other words, did you move his hands or turn him upside down, or did you do anything like that?
I never left the sidewalk. So no.
This photograph that you would have taken of Mr. Trayvon Martin's body, the light that's shining on there, is that from your flashlight again?
Yes.
State Exhibit 78, you took this photograph too, sir, using your cell phone?
Yes.
And what were you trying to show in that photograph, sir?
That there was an object next to him that wasn't. I didn't see any other objects on the ground other than a little flashlight on the beginning part of the T. So that one just stood out.
Okay, and am I pointing to it right here in this photo, this part of the photograph, State Exhibit 78?
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
And again, the light that's shown on there, is that from your flashlight?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm through with, thank you very much. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Manalo, back in February of 2012, specifically February 26th of 2012, showing you State Exhibit 139 with your residence of in 2861, where I already have your wife's name on there.
Yes.
And is this area depicted in terms of you going out the garage and coming around here?
Yes.
Is that what you've described earlier?
Yes.
Thank you. What I want to do now is have you elaborate a little bit about what we talked about, specifically your contact with the defendant. And the flashlight that you saw on the ground that you photographed, was that flashlight on in terms of, was it illuminating?
No.
When you observed the victim, in this case, Mr. Martin on the ground, Trayvon Martin on the ground, was he moving at all, or did he say anything when you came upon him?
No.
And I apologize if I've already asked you, did you say his hands and arms that were under his torso, his hands were?
Yes.
If you could, tell the jury when you first came into contact with the defendant, when you observed him, if you said anything to him and if he said anything to you, please tell us what happened.
Okay, I came around the corner and he was walking to me and I asked him, do I need to call 911? He says, no, I just got off the phone with him. And then he asked me.
At that point, did you see a gun, sir?
No, I did not see a gun.
Did you, other than when the police got there, did you see a gun on the defendant?
No.
Did it appear to you as if the defendant had been in a fight, sir?
Yes.
Did he speak to you, sir?
Yes.
Did he respond to your questions?
Yes.
Did he appear as if he was out of it, like not thinking clearly?
No.
Did you have any trouble understanding him when he spoke?
No.
Did you ask him something when you found out that he had a gun? Did you ask him anything about the gun, sir?
I asked him what caliber he used.
And what did he say, sir?
9mm.
Did a police officer arrive, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell the jury what happened when the officer arrived?
He says, for my safety, I'm going to handcuff you. He says, okay. He had his cell phone in his hand, so he kind of like tossed it on the ground. And he says, can you call my wife?
Okay, let me interrupt you a second. When you say he had the cell phone in his hand, are you speaking of the defendant, George Zimmerman?
Yes.
And you said when the officer came, he tossed it on the ground?
Yes.
He being Mr. Zimmerman tossed it on the ground?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. I interrupted you. Did the officer ask him who shot the Trayvon Martin? I know he didn't use the word Trayvon Martin, but who shot the person?
I don't remember.
Okay. Did, at that time when the officer, I apologize, I interrupted you, when the officer asked him about a gun, what happened then?
He put him in his handcuffs, and he asked me to call his wife.
Okay. Did the officer ask the defendant whether he had a gun on him?
Yes.
And defendant indicate or point or do something related to where the gun was?
Yes.
Tell us, if you could, the circumstances related to that.
He put his right arm up and he said, "I have it here."
And had you seen the gun prior to him saying that?
No.
When the defendant put his right arm up and he indicated that he had a gun, at that time were you able to observe it?
Yes.
And where was the gun, sir?
What was the gun?
Where was it?
Where was it was inside the waistband holster.
Okay. Prior to that, had you seen the gun at all?
No.
Okay. And did you observe the officer then handcuff the defendant and do something with the gun?
Yes, he put it in, I guess, his utility belt so he would have control of it.
Did the officer tell the defendant he was going to put him in handcuffs?
Yes.
And defendant replied and say that that was fine.
Yes.
You mentioned something about the defendant throwing the phone on the ground. Tell us what happened regarding that, sir.
He asked me to call his wife. I said, "Let him put you in his handcuffs." Once he had done that, I picked up his phone, I put it in his pocket, and I zipped it up, and then I called his wife through my phone.
Okay. He asked you to call his wife, meaning the defendant asked you to call his wife?
Yes.
And you stated you picked up the cell phone
Yes.
and you put it in whose pocket?
Zimmerman's pocket.
Okay. Do you know what pocket you put it in?
His left side pocket.
And why did you pick the left side pocket to put the gun in?
Why did I pick that
Yeah.
pocket? Because it was closest to me.
Okay. The defendant, Mr. Zimmerman, asked you to call his wife. Did you do that?
Yes.
Did you know her number?
No.
Did you know her before him telling you to call her?
No.
How were you able to get his number?
He gave me her number.
So did you actually dial her number?
Yes.
And did you call her?
Yes.
Did you talk to her?
Yes.
Tell us the circumstance, what happened what did you tell her and what did she say? And also more importantly, if the defendant said anything while this was going on.
Okay. I had a connection with her right away, and I said, "Your husband has been involved in a shooting. He's being handcuffed, and he's going to be held for questioning at the Sanford Police Department." And around that time, he kind of cut me off, and he says, "Just tell her I shot someone."
Okay. When you say he cut you off, the defendant cut you off?
Yes.
And he said what now?
Just tell her I shot someone.
Did you respond to that?
Yes.
What did you say?
Okay, well, he just shot someone.
Were you saying to his wife on the phone?
Yes, I was saying it to his wife.
In terms of when he said that, how would you describe the defendant's demeanor?
Like I was taking too long to say what I had to say.
You mentioned you saw the victim's body, the person you now know as Trayvon Martin. Did you see any movement at any time out there in his body?
No.
Did you ever hear him say anything?
No.
Now, in terms of when you heard the shot and when you ended up going outside, if you could estimate, I know you didn't have a stopwatch, how long did it take you to, upon hearing the shot, go out the garage and go outside and come into contact with the defendant, Mr. Zimmerman?
It could have been 10, 20 seconds.
When you first observed him, was your first observation that he had been in a fight and been beaten?
Yes.
Okay. Did you remain outside while the officers arrived?
Yes.
Were you present when they attempted to revive or save the life of Trayvon Martin?
Yes.
Could you tell us what you recall seeing or observing about that?
The first officer arrived and turned him over, and I think more were starting to come. And he was asking for a bag to do compressions on his chest, and I watched him perform CPR.
Okay. Regarding the bag, did you go somewhere and get a bag to assist the officers?
I went through the garage, and my wife handed me a bag.
Walmart bag?
Yes.
Okay. And did you come back out and provide that to the officer in an attempt to save Trayvon Martin's life?
Yes.
Now, prior to that night, had you ever met George Zimmerman?
No.
Had you ever met Trayvon Martin?
No.
Were you ever involved in the neighborhood watch program at all?
No.
Why not?
I have work. I got other things that I have to do. I have a 6-year-old to take care of, so.
When you first came into contact with the defendant that evening, did he appear to be in shock, sir?
No.
And what is your opinion based on, sir?
He wasn't acting like anything different. I mean, he was coherent. He was responding to my questions like it was not like just like any other person.
Okay. In your actions there before the officer came, did you observe the defendant at any time look back at the body of Trayvon Martin?
No.
The defendant appear calm, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. O'Meara?
This is Mr. West, Your Honor.
Mr. West?
I don't really like either one of these guys. I prefer the other one.
Afternoon.
Well,
Thank you. Grab my water. I'll be right back.
Oh, Jesus. Be prepared. Be prepared. Sorry. That's probably loud.
You're in the living room with your wife and your daughter putting some furniture together when you hear some noises outside,
yes.
correct? And your wife expressed sort of an interest in seeing what was going on, and you basically told her just mind your own business.
Yes.
And she said there's two guys out there fighting, or some guys fighting, correct?
Yes.
And you weren't unable to see anything.
No.
You never looked out. But you did hear the noise continue after that.
Yes.
And it moved from where you were at the corner of the complex, it moved from your right to left,
Yes.
as if from the area of the T on past your unit.
Yes.
And as you were hearing this, there was a point where you heard what you believed to be a shot.
Yes.
Did you hear the shot yourself, or did your wife say, I think I hear a shot?
We both heard the shot.
So in your mind, it was unmistakable that it was a shot.
Yes.
You made the decision then to go find out what that was about.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you went from the living room near the back of the residence, the other direction, towards the garage.
Yes.
And in the garage, you grabbed a flashlight.
Yes.
Did you go out the garage door?
Yes.
And then basically on the front of your house, which is at Retreat View Circle.
Yes.
So you then would have had to turn back around and run the length of your house, your unit, that would basically bring you within view of where this event had occurred.
Yes, I didn't run.
Walk briskly, just a sense of that is all.
I was carefully walking. I didn't just walk upon the scene, seeing what was going on.
Well, sure, you'd heard a gunshot, right?
Right.
You'd take some precautions, I would think.
Yes.
So you had a flashlight, and obviously you had your cell phone. And your best estimate is that it was somewhere between 10 and 20 seconds from when you heard the shot as to when you got to where you could actually see something.
Yes.
At first, you didn't see Trayvon Martin's body, correct?
Correct.
What you saw instead, or what caught your attention first, actually, what may have caught your attention first was the little flashlight that was on.
No.
What caught your attention first was George Zimmerman.
Yes.
And when you saw him there, he was breathing hard.
Yes.
He was staggering.
Yes.
And it looked to you like he'd just gotten his butt beat.
Yes.
And you approached him.
Yes.
You weren't fearful of him.
No.
Didn't turn the other way to call the police.
I had asked him, do I need to call the police?
Well, I'm saying yourself. As you approached, you saw him. You knew there was a gunshot. You didn't turn to call the police yourself.
All right.
And when you got closer to Mr. Zimmerman, you asked him, in fact, do I need to call the police?
Yes.
And and he told you, no, I already called them, something to that effect.
Yes.
And you didn't know yourself at that moment whether he was talking about the call that he tried to be making or was on the phone, or whether he had called them himself 2, 3, 4 minutes before.
Not aware of that.
Right. Your assumption was that when you saw him on the phone at that point with the phone up to his ear, that he had been talking to the police.
Yes.
But of course, all of that would have had to have taken place within the 10 to 20 seconds that it took you to get there before you saw him, after the
That's
shot.
not working.
Correct.
So he would have had to have placed a call to the police. He would have had to have called the police, waited for the call to collect, to connect, and then had the conversation with the police, have that over by the time you asked him, do you want me to call?
Unmute.
I'm not aware of that. I mean, he wasn't talking on the phone. He just, as I came around the corner, he had just had the phone to his ear.
Right. And you learned very soon thereafter that he wanted you to tell his wife about being involved in a shooting.
Yes.
He was trying to catch his breath, and he asked you, in fact, am I bleeding?
Yes.
And you noticed that indeed he was. He was bleeding from his face.
Yes.
It looked like his nose was dripping.
Yes.
And then he kind of stooped over like this, as if trying to collect himself.
No, he just squatted down. He didn't stoop down like that. He just
Like this?
Yeah.
As if trying to collect himself.
I won't say collect himself, but I guess so. I don't know. but he did squat down.
Well, did you say that in a prior statement, that you thought he kind of stooped down
He
to
did.
try to collect
I
himself?
believe I said he squatted down.
I don't mean, I'm not squat versus stoop, but that he bent down in some way
Yes,
Yes.
to try to collect himself. He was breathing hard. He looked like he'd just gotten his butt kicked.
yes,
Compound question.
He answers, he understands.
He did.
yeah,
Sure.
He
So
did.
at that point, you could actually see that he was
did.
also bleeding
you.
from the back of his head.
yes,
You hadn't noticed that before.
no,
And you had your flashlight and you had your cell phone with you,
yes,
and you took that opportunity to take the picture of the back of his head. Is this picture?
yes,
So as Mr. Zimmerman kind of squatted down
Well,
to
we
collect
took those
himself, you took it
pictures.
upon yourself to take the picture.
yes,
He didn't ask you to take the picture.
no,
Thankfully, you did, but that was your decision.
yes,
Mhm.
You also asked him what happened.
yes,
And he said, this guy was beating me up and I shot him.
and I had to defend myself and I shot him.
I'm sorry.
I was defending myself and I shot him.
So this guy was beating me up. I was defending myself and I shot him, is what he told you,
Yes,
without hesitation.
no,
And from what you could tell at the moment, it seemed completely true.
yes,
It wasn't very long until the police arrived. You were standing there talking to Mr. Zimmerman as he tried to collect himself. And shortly thereafter, Officer Tim Smith of the Sanford Police Department got there, correct?
I didn't know his name.
Well,
Yeah, right,
a police within a very short time, the first police officer arrived,
right.
and he had a flashlight.
I don't remember if he had a flashlight.
You don't remember the next person after you arriving with a flashlight?
I knew it was a police officer, but I don't remember the flashlight because I already had mine on.
Oh, right, you could see from your own flashlight,
Yes,
but it was really, really dark out there.
yes,
Really, really dark.
So Officer Smith will use that for our purposes, or the first officer arrived, and he said, who shot him?
yes,
And George Zimmerman immediately said, I did.
yes,
And Officer Smith said, do you have a gun, or something to that effect?
yes,
And George Zimmerman immediately complied by raising his arms, or his right arm, and exposed the firearm that was in the holster on his right side.
yes,
And then Officer Smith's response or reaction was, I'm going to handcuff you for officer safety.
yes,
And that's in fact what happened.
yes,
And George Zimmerman complied fully with that request.
yes,
He basically made himself available to be cuffed behind the back.
yes,
In the meantime, while George Zimmerman was in the process of being cuffed, he wanted you to call his wife.
yes,
And in the process of him being cuffed and wanting you to call his wife, he put the phone on the ground.
yes,
He couldn't very well do much since he was in the process of being cuffed other than that, correct?
right,
So your purpose at that point was to let his wife know that her husband had been involved in a shooting.
yes,
And indeed, that's what you did.
yes,
You called and had a conversation with the person on the other end that you believed to be his wife.
yes,
And your statement to her was, your husband's been involved in a shooting,
yes,
and he's going to be taken in for questioning.
yes,
And you were beginning to explain a little bit when Mr. Zimmerman, in the process of being handcuffed, said, just tell her I shot someone, correct?
yes,
And that's to make it absolutely clear that he wasn't the one who had been shot, and
Objection.
that he was,
What Mr. Zimmerman was thinking?
Sustained.
you suggest a moment in your direct that he may have been abrupt. And abrupt by saying, basically, just get to the point.
yes,
The point being that he wasn't shot, someone else had been shot.
yes,
That's a good spin. Because I originally took it as just tell her I shot somebody.
You thought
But instead of
that the
you
way that
originally said
Mr.
it,
Zimmerman said that wasn't animated enough. He wasn't hyper enough. He wasn't agitated enough for you to think that he was in shock.
I don't understand.
I don't either.
When you were asked, do you think he was in shock? In your mind, being in shock means somebody that's hyper, somebody that's agitated.
Or just completely unresponsive.
One
That's
extreme or
not
the
fair.
other.
Right.
You don't know what I'm
So either
thinking.
someone's going to be basically bouncing off the walls or numb.
Right,
And Mr. Zimmerman wasn't either of those.
right,
He was pointed, correct? In his response, just tell her I shot someone.
yes,
He was also compliant with the police officer so that he did understand what was being said.
yes,
And what struck you was that he was not, rather than not being animated, he was kind of flat. That's what you mean, didn't appear to be in shock. He was just kind of flat.
yes,
So that's what you took to mean that he wasn't in shock.
right,
Not that you have any particular training or experience in identifying when people are in shock.
right.
I take it this isn't something that you've been involved in very many times in your life, if ever before.
Right.
While you were,
I hate when they ask those questions.
just something that
How are you
reminded me
supposed
here,
to
you
tell
don't
when
attend
somebody's
any
in
of the
shock?
HOA
You
meetings
can't sit
yourself.
here and tell
You don't
somebody.
involve yourself in the community itself.
No,
With your work and family and all the stuff you've got going on, you don't attend meetings or participate in programs like Neighborhood Watch.
no,
Your view, at least at that point in your life in that community, was you just sort of mind your own business, go to work and do what you need to do to support your family.
right. And if there was ever a problem, because there's a sign up there that says Neighborhood Watch, if there was ever a problem, just call 911.
So when you come into the community, then there's a sign that says Neighborhood Watch, correct?
Yes,
And I suppose that means that somebody coming into the community to
Somebody's
steal
watching your
stuff
neighborhood.
or to hurt people would see that, presumably, and think that there's somebody there that may be watching them.
I wouldn't think that's what it meant. I would think it would have meant that people in the neighborhood would work together if there was a problem and call 911 if there was a problem, but not necessarily for a warning for would-be criminals to come in there to.
You don't think that was kind of like having a security alarm company sign in the front yard, but not actually having a system?
Haven't really thought about that. No.
Your perspective was it just reminds people that if they see a problem, they should call 911.
Right.
You familiar that the community neighborhood watch program involved more communication, more contact among neighbors, guidance as to what they should do, not if it's just an emergency that would require a 911 call, but what to do in a suspicious circumstance by calling a non-emergency number.
I don't understand.
Just you didn't know what was going on in the community specifically with neighborhood watch.
Right.
I know you said that it was dark, and I know that you had a flashlight, and I know that you took two pictures that show Trayvon Martin lying on the ground following the shot. Those are in evidence as 77 and 78. Could we, first of all, we're going to show those here in a second, but the exact position that's shown in the photograph is the exact position that you personally saw with your eyes Trayvon Martin's body.
Yes.
You saw his legs kind of spread like this, almost as if he were riding a bicycle.
I don't remember.
Let's take a look at 77.
Would you pull that?
Please.
Oh, it's muted. I'm sorry. It was showing a picture. I just took it off of there. I don't need to see the picture again. Nope, I don't want to. Could you not, please? You did that on purpose.
doesn't matter, but the other picture that you took is state 78. And you can see, can you not, that Trayvon Martin's body is in the same position, although it's a lot harder to see, isn't it?
Yes.
And now you can see more clearly this flashlight.
Yes.
And the flashlight was not on at any point in time when you saw it.
No.
At that point, you had no idea whether it may even have been connected to the case, only that you saw it there and
Oh,
caught your
was that the little
attention.
one?
Yes.
So when you shifted your
Oh, no.
flashlight
I remember.
to point at the one in the picture, then as you can see here, Mr. Martin's body was, just like I said before, except for what you're showing with your flashlight, everything else was really quite dark.
Right.
Quite dark.
Do you know where you were standing at that point?
I was standing on the sidewalk.
Where you had encountered Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
Basically in the same spot, right?
Yes.
So from your vantage point where you had taken this picture generally, you sort of turned and took the pictures that we've shown here.
Yes.
You were up near the T intersection.
Yes.
Oh, he's almost done. And then we have a police officer.
Your best recollection is that you were at the T intersection when you took this picture?
I was a few feet away from the T, but I was in that area.
You were somewhere between the actual T intersection and far enough down the sidewalk where you could see Mr. Martin's body to have taken this picture?
Yes.
You recognize that the light on the sort of back patio area is from the light of the second unit in from the corner?
I couldn't remember that, whether that's the second or the third unit from the corner.
It was not, however, directly across from you.
Correct.
It was somewhat to the left of where your unit was.
Yes.
Sorry. Not quite yet, Judge, thank you. Just for orientation in the photo and sort of where you were when it was taken. You see the porch light or the lit area in the back,
Yes.
and you believe that to be the back of someone's unit, either the second or possibly the third unit.
Yes.
And then in the lower left corner, there seems to be sort of a dark edge. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that the sidewalk?
Yes.
So what you're seeing here is the edge of the sidewalk on the left, the illuminated flashlight that's off, and then Mr. Martin's body
Yes.
in between the sidewalk and the back patio area of that residence.
Yes.
When you say that you saw Mr. Martin's hands or arms tucked under him, do I understand correctly that you saw what's in the picture? Nothing
Yes.
different than that.
No.
So whatever's in the picture is what you saw.
Yes.
Yes.
There was a woman that testified earlier this week, Jeannie Manalo. Is that your wife that
Yes.
you talked about?
Well, I would think so.
Yes, I'll clarify something, sorry. When you took this picture, you were basically at the spot where you had encountered Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the question.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No redirect. Just no.
You mentioned that you
One
felt,
time
The image, please.
I'm sorry, what?
Remove the image, please, for exhibit 7, the age unfinished with it.
You are? Okay, I may need it.
Okay.
Mr. Manalo, you mentioned that when you came into contact with the defendant, Mr. Zimmerman, that he appeared calm to you, is that correct?
Yes.
And it's already been asked and answered by Mr. Del Rionda in direct.
Okay, well, this is redirect, and I think he's just trying to orientate the witness as to his next question, so overruled.
You recall when you first came into contact,
Down.
he was calm, is that correct?
Yes.
And
I think that's a mischaracterization of this witness's testimony as to whether he was calm.
Okay, the witness can clarify what his answer is.
Thank you, Judge.
how would you describe Mr. Zimmerman's demeanor, sir?
Coherent, compliant. He wasn't, he was calm. You know, he just basically just walking towards me.
Did he have any trouble walking towards you, sir?
He was staggering a little bit,
Okay. And when you say staggering, elaborate on that, what you mean by that.
basically getting up off the ground.
Was he walking like this?
No, just like hunched up.
Among other things.
Overruled.
She does not like him.
Was he erect, sir?
At one point, he became erect, yes.
Did you have any trouble understanding him when he spoke, Mr. Zimmerman?
No.
She does not like that attorney.
In your conversations with Mr. Zimmerman, did you ask him what
Seems
kind
to
of
do
caliber
fine
of gun
with
he
the
has?
other one,
Yes.
but she
And did he
does
respond
not
to you?
like that.
Yes.
What did the defendant say, sir?
9mm.
Just an observation. She doesn't let him approach. She sustains.
You were asked
All
by
of his objections.
Mr. West about the statements the defendant made about shooting the individual, and he asked you whether you agreed that that was defending himself. Were you out there when this happened?
I came out after it happened.
Did you see actually what happened? What precipitated this? Or did you actually see the shooting where George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin in the chest? Did you see that?
No.
Do you have any inkling of how it happened, whether it's self-defense or not?
No.
Thank you. No further questions. I apologize. Do you want this still up? No. I'm going to show. That's all right. What do I do?
Well, if you're gonna do it, bro.
May Mr. Manalo be excused? Thank you very much, sir. You are excused. Please call your next witness.
Officer Ricardo Ayala.
Oh, goody, it's this waffle.
Please only swear firm the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
You may proceed.
Good afternoon, sir. If you please tell the members of the jury your name
Ricardo Ayala,
and where are you employed?
Ayala,
You're employed where?
Sanford Police Department.
And how long have you been with the Sanford Police Department?
It'll be 11 years next month.
All right. And what's your current position?
Police officer,
And how long have you been in the patrol unit right now?
just over a year.
All right. And before that, what was your position?
Investigations,
All right. And how long were you in investigations?
6 years.
And your duties as an investigator with the Sanford Police Department?
General and major crimes.
All right. Do you have any prior law enforcement experience before coming to the Sanford Police Department?
Yes, corrections.
And how long and where?
Total of 6 years, 5 of them in Seminole County, 1 in Lake County.
Let me turn your attention then to the evening of Sunday, February 26, 2012. Were you working at that time?
Yes, sir.
And on that evening, did you respond to the scene of a shooting at the retreat at Twin Lakes?
Yes, sir.
Were you dispatched to that scene?
Yes, sir.
What was the nature of the dispatch at first?
Suspicious person in the area,
Do you recall the time of the dispatch?
just after 7 p.m.
Approximately 7:15, 7.
Correct.
Okay. What area of town were you in when you received the dispatch?
North end of the city,
And approximately how long did it take you to get from where you were to the retreat at Twin Lakes community?
less than 5 minutes.
Did you receive any updates to the first dispatch as you were en route?
Yes.
And what was the nature of the dispatch?
Stated that shots were fired.
Were you the first officer on the scene?
No, sir.
Who was the first officer?
Officer Tim Smith.
If you would dim the lights, please. Officer, let me show you State's Exhibit 1. You recognize that as being a aerial photograph of the treated Twin Lakes?
Yes, sir.
You want me to press it? Laser pointer, just to press that. Can you show the jury where the main entrance is? With your laser pointer?
Right there.
All right. And that would be off of Oregon Avenue?
Correct.
All right. Can you show the members of the jury then where you went when you got in the neighborhood and where you parked?
Came this way, came into the entrance, went around the ways. I believe, if I'm mistaken, went around as such and parked right in this area right here.
All right. And for the record, you parked on the upper right-hand corner of the photograph?
Yes, sir.
All right. So you actually took the long way around.
Yes, I wasn't familiar with the area.
Very good. Did you see Officer Smith after you got out of your patrol car?
Yes, I did.
And where did you see him? If you could just indicate approximately the area that you saw Officer Smith.
That general area right there.
All right. And for the record, that's in the approximate area of the T. What was the lighting like back there?
Very dim, very almost dark.
Were you using a flashlight to find your way between the townhomes?
Yes, sir.
What were the weather conditions like when you arrived?
Misty has been raining on and off.
And what was Officer Smith doing when you first arrived?
He had a white male at gunpoint.
Did you later learn the white male's name to be George Zimmerman?
That's correct.
And you see that person in court this afternoon?
Yes, sir.
And judges, you can raise the lights if you would. Is George Zimmerman the gentleman to my left who just stood up?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, the record should reflect that the witnesses identified the defendant.
The record will so reflect.
Did you have any interaction with the defendant at that point?
No, sir.
Why not?
I was focused on the male that was on the ground.
And the male that was on the ground, did you later learn that person's name to be Trayvon Martin?
That's correct.
And did you go over to Trayvon Martin's location?
I walked towards, yes.
And how was Trayvon Martin's body positioned when you arrived?
Face down, his hands were underneath the body.
And to your knowledge, were you the first officer to approach Trayvon Martin?
Yes.
Did you know whether or not he was dead or alive at that point?
I did not.
Did you know what his involvement was at that point?
I did not.
Did you give him any commands, Trayvon Martin?
Yes, I did.
What commands did you give him?
I asked to see his hands
And where were his hands when you asked to see him?
underneath him.
He was lying on his stomach?
Correct.
Did Trayvon Martin respond physically in any way to your commands?
No, he did not.
Did Trayvon Martin respond verbally in any way to your commands?
No, he did not.
Did you see any movement from Trayvon Martin's body?
I did not.
Did you hear any sounds from Trayvon Martin's body?
I did not.
Did other Sanford Police Department officers approach you and Trayvon Martin while you were giving him those commands or shortly thereafter?
Sergeant Raimondo.
And did either you or Sergeant Raimondo attempt to get a pulse from Trayvon Martin?
Sergeant Raimondo did.
Was Sergeant Raimondo able to get a pulse?
No, sir.
Did you and or Sergeant Raimondo move Trayvon Martin's body after he failed to get a pulse?
Yes, I believe it was a joint.
I'm sorry?
I believe we moved him, yes.
Okay, how did you move him?
We turned him upside up, right side up.
All right, so you moved him from his stomach to his back?
Correct.
To your knowledge, did you move or disturb any evidence that was around his body or on his body when you rolled him over?
No, sir.
Did Trayvon Martin respond in any way, either physically or verbally, when you rolled his body over?
No, sir.
After rolling his body over, did you see anything that appeared to be a gunshot wound?
After moving it, and later, yes.
After
After he's moved over, around, yes.
Yes, sir. And where was that?
It was underneath, he had a pin or a button, so it was underneath the button.
All right, he had are you indicating a button on his shirt or
Correct.
sweatshirt?
Yes,
All right. And the gunshot wound was near that area?
it was right underneath the button itself.
How did you find the gunshot wound?
How do we find? We lifted, well, when we moved the sweater, the button kind of lift up so you could see it went through the sweater. So at that time we lifted up his sweater and shirt.
All right, actually exposing his bare chest?
Correct.
And you can see a gunshot wound or something that appeared to be a gunshot wound at that point?
Yes, sir.
Did you and Sergeant Raimondo perform CPR on Trayvon Martin?
Yes, sir.
And do you have CPR training?
Yes, sir.
And did either you or Sergeant Raimondo ask anybody for anything while you were performing or attempting to perform CPR?
Sergeant Raimondo was asking for a plastic bag, of some sort.
And did anyone provide anything to Sergeant Raimondo or yourself?
Someone provided the bag to him, yes.
Can you describe the bag? Was it like a plastic type grocery bag?
Correct.
Do you recall the color of the bag?
I do not.
And do you recall who provided it?
I do not.
After receiving the bag, did you and Sergeant Raimondo continue to perform CPR?
Correct. We did.
At any time, did you see any signs of life from Trayvon Martin's body?
No, sir.
What was your role specifically in the administration of CPR?
I was doing chest compressions.
And what was Sergeant Raimondo's role?
He was doing mouth to mouth.
Did rescue eventually respond to the scene?
Yes.
And did the rescue personnel take over the treatment or assessment of Trayvon Martin after they arrived?
Yes.
Was Trayvon Martin pronounced dead at the scene?
Yes, he was.
Did you have any further contact or involvement with this defendant after you performed CPR on Trayvon Martin?
No, sir.
And did investigators and crime scene technicians respond to that scene while you were still present?
Yes, sir.
And did those officers and technicians take over the scene after they arrived?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any further involvement with the case?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. Judge, that's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. O'Mara?
Thank you. Afternoon, officer.
How
How
you
are
doing,
you?
sir? Thank you.
Just a couple of questions. When you had heard as you were on your way that Officer Smith had just arrived on the scene, correct? As you were coming,
As I was getting there,
right?
yeah, he was just arriving on the scene.
Because you guys are in radio contact, weren't you? All the responding officers.
Yes, sir.
So you knew that you were right behind Officer Tim Smith to get there.
Yes.
Could you even guesstimate from the radio transmissions how fast or quickly after him you got there?
If I would guesstimate, less than 2 minutes.
Matter of fact, it was so quick that the officer still had Mr. Zimmerman at gunpoint, right?
That's correct.
In a shots fired situation, when you come into a dark area like that, it's protocol to take out your weapon and control the situation, right?
Correct.
That's not to
Okay, I
suggest
guess I
any
understand.
particular danger coming from Mr. Zimmerman. That's just what you do in a situation where you have shots fired.
That's correct.
And that's appropriately for Officer Smith to have done that here, correct?
Correct.
Now, if you were to come up to me, how would you tell me, or what would you tell me to do in a situation like that, where you pull your weapon and are trying to control the situation that you're just coming upon?
I want to see your hands.
Right. And you say that, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If I had a cell phone, you think it would be appropriate? If I had a cell phone,
With
you say,
your
see my hands,
hand.
to maybe go like this,
No, it would not.
or even like this?
No, it would not.
What would you want me to do with that cell phone?
Drop it where it's at.
Why?
That way we make sure we have no weapons and nothing in your hands.
Okay. When you came on with Smith, did you take out, right behind Smith, did you take out your weapon as well?
Yes, sir.
Same reason?
Yes, sir.
You don't know what's going on, do you?
No, we're not.
Can't see very much, can you?
No, sir.
Flashlight in one hand, your gun in the other?
No, the gun actually has a flashlight on it.
Oh, so both, gun with flashlight,
Yes.
watching and seeing what's going on.
Yes, sir.
You actually said in your report that you were protecting Officer Smith, right? Is that a
Correct.
focus, at least initially?
Correct.
Because he's at least a fellow officer potentially in a dangerous situation.
Yes, sir.
Once you realized, or did you come to realize that Officer Smith had that part of the situation, including Mrs. Zimmerman, under control? Did that happen?
Well, I had my weapon out until, well, I was having my eyes on Mr. Zimmerman and Trayvon at the same time. We didn't know what was going on.
Right.
As soon as he secured Zimmerman, I went ahead and focused on Trayvon, make sure where the threat was coming from.
Was there another person there?
When we got there,
Yes.
or when I got there,
Yes.
there probably was. I was mostly focused on security for the officer.
Just curious, we had some testimony that a neighbor had come out with a flashlight. It may not have caught your memory.
It doesn't, no.
Okay, because you're mainly focused on your fellow officers
Mhm.
and the interested parties, in that case, Mrs. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin.
Yes, sir.
Okay. From your awareness of it, did Officer Smith have any concerns with securing Mr. Zimmerman? Was
No,
it-
after he got him scared
Okay.
and took him to his vehicle and secured him in the vehicle. He was gone. He was good.
Was Mrs. Zimmerman compliant as far as you were aware?
Yes.
Did you do everything that Officer Smith asked him to do?
Yes, he did.
Did he disobey in any form that you're aware of?
No, he did not.
Did you get a look at his face?
No. I looked at, yes, I'm sorry, his face. Yeah, I didn't focus
Right.
at,
Sort of a quick glance?
yes.
Did you notice the blood on his nose?
I can't tell you I did, no.
Okay. Again, not a focus of yours once you were secured.
Exactly.
At that point, I think you said a moment ago, you shifted over to Trayvon Martin, who was off at that point, sort of to the left.
Yes,
Okay. And it was quite dark, right?
yes,
You would not have been able to see Trayvon Martin's body but for your flashlight. Is that accurate?
yeah, it's pretty accurate.
And I think that you testified you attempted to do what you could as a first responder to deal with Trayvon Martin.
Correct.
And you did not see, did you see George Zimmerman again when he was in the back of Tim Smith's patrol car?
No,
Never even went over there?
no, I didn't make contact with him after he was secured.
Okay. Just a moment, Your Honor.
No more questions.
Thanks, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Will you redirect?
Just briefly, Officer Ayala, when the defendant was complying with Officer Smith commands, with Officer Smith holding him at gunpoint?
When I arrived there, yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. May Officer
Ayala.
Ayala be excused.
You may.
Thank you very much. You may be excused. Call your next witness.
Stacy Livingston?
Will you be another neighbor? I know you are a police officer.
He saw me swear from the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. I do. I do. I do. I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am. If you'd please tell the members of the jury your name.
Stacy Livingston,
Oh, sure.
Let me ask you to just scoot up just a little bit closer to that microphone, just to make sure we can hear you. Where are you employed?
Sanford Fire Department,
And how long with the Sanford Fire Department?
First.
a little over 25 years.
Your current position there is what?
Firefighter EMT,
And what does EMT stand for?
emergency medical technician.
Are you certified in the state of Florida as both a firefighter and an EMT?
Yes.
No.
And what are your duties as a firefighter EMT with the Sanford Fire Department?
Anything from fire calls to medical calls or anything that the citizens call for.
All right. Can you give the jury a brief description of your training and education that has prepared you for your duties as a firefighter and EMT?
I went through the certification of Florida to become a firefighter, also state of Florida for EMT, and we have continuing education at work.
All right. Let me turn your attention then to the evening of Sunday, February 26, 2012, where you working that evening.
Yes,
And on that evening, were you dispatched to the scene of a person shot at the Retreat at Twin Lakes complex here in Sanford, Seminole County, Florida?
yes,
Where were you when you were dispatched to the call?
at Fire Station 38.
And were you dispatched along with other firefighters and EMTs?
Yes,
Do you recall the time of the dispatch?
I do not.
Was it approximately 7:20 in the evening?
Yes,
All right. And can you give the jury an idea of about how long it took you to arrive?
it would be a guess.
You know, man, first witness? Let me just ask you to look at this document. It's just a refresh recollection, Your Honor. And ask you, was that an incident report created from this event?
Yes,
All right. Is on that report, is there a time of dispatch, either on the first page or the second page?
yes,
And what time was your unit dispatched?
1921.
That's 7:21 p.m.?
Yes,
And what time is there an arrival time?
1927.
7:27 p.m.
Correct.
All right, about 6 minutes later?
Yes,
All right. Was the Sanford Police Department and officers already on the scene when you arrived?
yes,
And were you directed to the location of the shooting victim when you arrived?
yes,
Did you later learn that person's name to be Trayvon Martin?
yes,
And were Sanford police officers present with Trayvon Martin's body when you arrived?
yes.
And what were those officers doing?
CPR
How was Trayvon Martin's body positioned when you got there?
on his back.
And did you and other Sanford Fire Rescue personnel take over the CPR when you arrived?
We didn't take over CPR, but we took over assessing him.
Okay. Did you check Trayvon Martin for a pulse?
Yes,
How did you do that?
on his carotid, on his neck.
On his neck?
Yes,
And what did you find?
no pulse.
While you were treating or evaluating Trayvon Martin, did you move his clothing in any way?
Yes,
And what did you move specifically?
I lifted his shirt.
Did you notice anything in Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt when you moved it?
Yes.
And what was that, as best you can recall?
I wasn't sure what it was at the time. I know what it is now.
Okay. Well, first of all, where was it?
In the front of his sweatshirt.
All right. What was it?
It felt like a can.
All right. What did you do with it, if anything?
I took it out and just moved it to my right side behind
All
me.
right. Did you take time to examine the can for any reason?
No,
Why not?
that wasn't my concern. I was just trying to get to the patient.
All right. Did you detect or feel anything else in Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt when you moved it?
Yes.
And what was that?
It just felt like maybe a small bag. When I moved the shirt, it made like a kind of like a crinkling noise.
All right. Did you do anything with that small bag?
I did not.
And was that item also in Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt?
I wasn't exactly where it was, but when I moved the shirt up, I felt it, but it wasn't large enough to be in my way.
All right. When you pulled up Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt, did you see any injuries?
Yes.
And specifically, did you see what appeared to be a gunshot wound?
Yes.
And where was that?
In his chest.
And what steps did you and the other personnel take to assess Trayvon Martin?
We put on a cardiac monitor
And what's the purpose of that?
to assess the heart rhythm.
And what was determined from the cardiac monitor?
It was determined by the lead paramedic on the scene that the rhythm was incompatible to life.
And was Trayvon Martin then pronounced dead at the scene?
Yes.
Does the report from the incident indicate the time that Trayvon Martin was pronounced dead?
On the report that I have here?
Yes, ma'am.
$19.30.
7:30?
Yes.
All right, and that was just a few minutes after you arrived, about 3 minutes after you arrived?
Yes.
Okay. At any point, did you hear Trayvon Martin make any sounds?
No.
Did you or anyone from your agency transport Trayvon Martin's body from the scene?
No.
And why not?
That wouldn't be part of our job.
Is that something, when a person's deceased, that's left for the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
Other than taking the can out of Trayvon Martin's shirt pocket, did you move or collect any other items on or around him?
No.
All right, let me ask you to look at your screen. Your Honor, would you dim the lights? Thank you. State's Exhibit 20, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the way Trayvon Martin appeared after he was pronounced?
We had his shirt up, but yes.
Okay. And State's 25 from the other side, is that also an accurate? Same scene.
Yes.
Do you see that individual in court this afternoon?
I don't know. Yes.
Is he the gentleman standing to my left?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, ask that the record reflect the witnesses identify the defendant. Where was the defendant when you made contact with him?
Sitting in a police car.
And when you met with the defendant, did you talk to him?
Yes.
Did the defendant appear to have any difficulty understanding what you were saying?
No.
Did you have any difficulty understanding the defendant when he responded to you?
No.
Did the defendant appear to have any memory problems?
No.
Object to that, Your Honor, that would be speculation.
Sustained.
Since it got out before the objection, I would need to move to strike the
Ladies and gentlemen, you're to disregard the question and the answer.
What is a Glasgow coma score?
It's a scoring system that we use to determine the level of responsiveness of a patient.
And what are the components of it? What makes it up?
It has 3 sections for eye, verbal, and motor response. And they each have a series of numbers, excuse me, like a score. For example, for eye, it's 4, 3, 2, 1. It would be spontaneous, to command, to pain, and none. And each section has a different amount of numbers per score.
All right. And what's the highest score someone can get? That is the most alert someone can be.
A 15.
And what was the defendant's Glasgow coma score that evening?
15.
And what does that highest score indicate to you?
It would indicate that for eye response, it was spontaneous. For verbal response, he was oriented. And for motor response, he obeyed commands.
Did you observe any injuries to the defendant?
Yes.
And what injuries did you observe?
He had a very swollen, bleeding nose. He had lacerations to the back of his head.
Was the defendant's nose actively bleeding when you arrived?
I don't believe it was actively bleeding.
All right.
It was still moist.
Okay. What did you do to treat his nose?
We just tried to clean up his injuries so we could see them better to determine.
And describe the lacerations that you saw on the back of the defendant's head.
I recall 2 lacerations, approximately an inch long,
All right. Were either of those lacerations bleeding?
not actively bleeding, but they had been.
And how did you treat the lacerations to the defendant's head?
The same, we just tried to clean up a little so we could view better what the injury was.
At any point while you were treating the defendant, did he stand up?
Yes,
Did the defendant have any trouble with his balance when he stood up?
I don't believe so.
And about how long were you treating the defendant?
You know what's fucked up about it is he felt threatened. He did what he did. He saw suspicious activity. Should he have followed him? No. Eyes and ears. Call the police. That's what he should have done. He did the wrong thing. At the end of the day, it was the wrong move on his part. Mistakes were made. But also, at the same time, when you make a wrong move and then you feel like your life is being threatened, which I feel like that is what is being portrayed here. And this is the state's case. This is the state's case. I haven't heard much to fend off against how he has not had or felt, I'm sorry, but if you are on top of me and you have bashed my head in, even to a grassy, soft yard, I'm going to feel threatened and scared for my life. Like, this is the state's case in chief. You are supposed to be telling me why I should convict this man of second-degree murder. And all I can think of right now is that he's got a bloody nose, he's got cuts and bumps all over his head because somebody beat the shit out of his head. Trayvon ain't got no marks, bruises, nothing on him. He just met the wrong end of a gun. Because at the end of the day, when you have a gun involved, shit happens. You feel like you have to defend yourself and you have a gun. Odds are the one on the receiving end is not gonna fare well. That sucks. He shouldn't have followed him. He should have called the police and let the police handle it. No doubt. But damn, once it's done, and now you're in it. Like, what would have happened had he not? He just would have got his ass beat and he would have run off, and then we would have just had an assault case. And that would have been that. I mean, everybody would have still been alive and none of this would have ever happened. But also, he was a minor, so therefore nothing would have happened. And it wouldn't have been televised, nothing would have come of it. He wouldn't have even been able to press charges. Because he was an adult following a minor. That's the crazy part. I don't even know. This shit's crazy, bro.
Maybe 5 minutes?
Did you transport the defendant from the scene?
No.
And why not?
It was determined that if he needed further medical treatment, that the Sanford police would take him.
And after you completed your examination of the defendant, did you leave the defendant in the custody of the Sanford Police Department?
Yes.
All right. Did you have any further involvement with the defendant after you left him with the police officers?
No.
All right. Let me ask you to look at the screen again, Your Honor. Thank you. States Exhibit 79. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the defendant as he appeared in the back of the officer's patrol car?
Yes.
And State 76. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the back of his head when you came upon him?
Yes.
Your Honor, that's all I have. Thank you.
Cross.
Thank you.
Afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Speaking about when you came in contact with my client, George Zimmerman, he was in the back of the patrol car, correct?
Yes.
And we just saw a couple pictures of him, and in the front picture I want to talk about first. You didn't actually do the evaluation, did you? On him, the sort of workup, wasn't that two other paramedics that were out there as well, correct?
What do you mean evaluation?
Well, I'm sort of who did sort of the workup on Mrs. Zimmerman to identify injuries and whatnot. Wasn't Mike Brandy in charge of sort of lead in that?
I believe it was myself and firefighter Kevin O'Rourke who treated Mr. Zimmerman.
Okay. Was it Mike Brandy there as well?
He was on the scene.
And when you did the evaluation, you noticed that the nose was swollen. I think you said very swollen, correct?
Yes, it was very swollen.
Okay. Explain, we saw the picture. Let's take a moment to look at that. I'm going to look for a little bit of help. I think I can get there. Thank you, Your Honor. Let's go down. No, please do it. From here. Let's go down. Great, thank you. Which one? The one right there, thanks. So looking at this one, first of all, this does fairly and accurately depict his nose and his face, correct, as you saw it?
Yes, I believe we may have even, because we wiped it a bit.
So even well, was that before this picture, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. So tell me what you see there as far as his injuries, if you can be a bit more descriptive.
The bridge of his nose is very swollen.
And that's off to the right of the nose, that swelling area there, is that what you're speaking of?
I recall both sides being swollen.
Okay, so the nose itself may be more on the right, but I was going to ask, the left side is swollen as well, isn't it?
The entire area was quite
Okay.
swollen.
And what is that just on the bridge of the nose, sort of going towards his right eye? That little red spot.
It appears to be a laceration, a small laceration.
Did you note that as well, that he had a laceration on the nose?
I did not.
Okay. How does a person get a laceration like that?
I don't know.
Okay. In your experience, is that consistent with getting struck in the nose by a fist?
It could.
Okay. Similar to the injuries to the nose itself and the swelling, are they also consistent with a fist strike to the nose?
Very possibly.
And do you see the injuries to what would be closest to you, his left forehead? Do you see those markings up there?
Yes.
What is that?
Looks like an abrasion.
Okay. Can you tell how that may have been, how he was injured with that?
I cannot.
Okay. Would you agree that that would be a separate injury from the injury to his nose?
Yes.
Now let's talk about what seems to be on the tip of his nose. What is that?
Blood.
And is that what you talked about earlier, that it was still moist in the process of drying?
Yes.
Where is that coming from?
His nose.
Inside?
Yes.
What does that indicate to you?
An injury to the nose.
Of what sort? What happens when the nose bleeds? How does it start bleeding?
Specifically?
Well, as best you can, if you can, describe how a shot to the nose would cause bleeding like that. What has to happen to it?
I mean, blood vessels would initiate bleeding.
Okay, and those blood vessels that exist up in the nose, correct?
Yes.
Any idea what happens to the blood that breaks or that escapes from blood vessels when you're laying on your back? What if you had that injury and you were laying on your back? Where would the blood go?
You would probably swallow it.
You go back up into your sinuses
Correct.
and then back down the back of your throat?
Correct.
And then if you could, you'd be swallowing your own blood, right?
Right.
You put the lights up if you would. Thank you very much. The injuries that we talked about on the back of the head, similar. You saw them that night the same way, correct?
Yes,
And then you cleaned them off,
I did.
and you could see lacerations that you identified as being about 1 inch long each, correct?
Approximately.
Right. Not actively bleeding when you saw them?
No.
Do you have a concern with head injuries? When you see a head injury, similar to this, what concerns come to you?
Concerns meaning,
Well, what medical issues are you down to? If you were to see, as you did, those 2 1-inch lacerations on the back of his head, did you have any concerns for any medical condition that may be happening to Mrs. Zimmerman because of those injuries?
yeah, we had, in questioning him, we asked, had he lost consciousness? I think he's the one that said he had felt dizzy.
Mhm.
We just continued to question him about that.
You would be concerned as a first responder to possible concussive injuries from an injury like that,
Correct?
where you can get a concussion when your head is hit that way?
Correct.
And even brain injury, is that a possibility from an injury like that?
Possibly.
And something that you need to be aware of?
Yes.
And you were only aware of that and concerned about it as you were treating him, correct?
Yes.
Reasonable, in your opinion, for somebody who's incurred those type of injuries to be concerned about their own continued safety?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Do you think a person who sustained those type of injuries in the back of the head should be concerned about their medical safety?
Possibly.
And how about the nose? Would that cause you concern about a person's medical safety if that injury was caused to them?
Possibly.
What is a normal procedure for head injuries and getting them x-rayed?
Well, they would have to be transported to a medical facility to receive an x-ray,
Sure, you can't get x-rays just in the back of your ambulance, right?
right?
So you'd have to take them to the hospital?
If they choose to go.
And who helps make that decision?
If the patient is fully awake and alert, they can make the decision.
So is it that final decision actually left up to the non-medical personnel?
It was discussed and we explained that we would be happy to transport him. And I'm not exactly how the determination was made, but I knew that it was determined that if he was going to receive medical care, the police was going to take him.
So that sort of became the police responsibility at that point, correct?
Correct.
Had it not been for the police involvement, would you have suggested to the person who had that injury and the injuries in the back of his head to go get some x-rays?
We would have said the same thing, that we would be happy to transport him, but it would have been up to them.
Okay. I might just have a moment, John. Just a minute or more and we'll be done. You said that he was able to get up, and did you say he stood up without trouble? Or I couldn't quite hear exactly what you said when you were asked about was he able to stand?
When we got to him, he was actually sitting sideways in the police car.
With
He
his sort
wasn't-
of feet out of the car? And his,
Yes, the
okay.
door was open and his feet were out.
All right.
And however it came about that he had said he had been dizzy, we asked him to stand up to see if he still felt dizzy, and he was able to stand up.
With the assistance of Officer Smith and one of the paramedics, correct? Because he was handcuffed behind his back, wasn't he?
I don't recall if he was handcuffed behind his back.
Okay, you don't recall that?
I don't.
Do you recall Officer Tim Smith helping him out of the car when he was complaining about being dizzy?
I do not.
Okay, do you remember whether it was paramedic Mike Brandy who helped him out of the car as well when he complained about being dizzy?
I do not.
Okay, your focus is really on injuries, clear them up, identify them, and then evaluate, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.
From your observations of the defendant, both his physical condition and his mental capabilities, do you have any concern that he had sustained a brain injury?
I wouldn't make that determination.
Did the defendant ever complain, other than of dizziness, did he ever complain of a headache or excruciating pain, anything like that?
Not to me.
Did he ever lose consciousness? While you were
Not while
there?
we were with him.
Did someone ask him whether or not he had lost consciousness prior to your arrival?
I believe so.
What did he say?
I didn't. I'm not the one that asked, so I don't know.
Did you ever take the time to measure either of the lacerations on the back of his head?
No.
All right, so your testimony about them being approximately an inch, that would be a guess?
Approximately an inch, yes.
All right. Would you defer to someone who actually measured them?
I'm sorry?
Would you defer the length of each of the lacerations to someone who actually measured them?
To be exact, yes.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Good, that's all I have.
Thank you. May Ms. Livingston be excused?
She may.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. You may be excused. Call your next witness, please.
Call Nancy Colgate. We call Tim Smith.
Okay. Do you need a break? Does anybody need a recess? No? All right. Thank you, though.
Please solemnly swear from the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir. If you please tell the members of the jury your name
Officer Timothy Smith,
and where you employed.
Sanford Police Department,
How long have you been with the Sanford Police Department?
since 2008.
And your position there is what?
Police officer,
How long as a patrol officer? How long in patrol specifically?
7 years.
Let me turn your attention to the evening of Sunday, February 26, 2012. Were you working that evening?
Yes, I was.
And were you in a standard patrol uniform as you are this afternoon?
Yes, I was.
How were you traveling?
In my marked Sanford Police vehicle,
Were you riding alone or with anyone?
alone.
On that evening, did you respond to a dispatch at the retreat at Twin Lakes Complex?
Yes, I did.
And what was the approximate time of the dispatch?
Shortly after 7 p.m.
What was the nature of the dispatch?
Suspicious persons.
And where were you when you received the dispatch?
I was conducting an area patrol in the parking lot of Summer Power Sports.
And where is that location relative to the retreat at Twin Lakes Complex?
Approximately a mile and a half.
And about how long did it take you to respond to the complex?
Just a few minutes.
Did you receive an update to the suspicious person dispatch while you were en route?
Yes, I did.
What was the nature of the update?
Shots fired.
Were you given an address to respond to for the shots fired?
Yes, I was.
And what was that address, if you recall?
I believe it was 1231 Twin Trees.
And where were you when you received the update?
entering the gates of the
Married
community.
to the
It is a gated complex?
Yes,
All right. How did you get through the gate?
one
with the gate code.
lady,
How did you get the gate code?
dispatch.
forensic tech
You know,
lady,
may I approach the witness? Would you dim the lights?
evidence tech.
So up on the screen is State's Exhibit 2. Let me give you a pointer.
Whatever she was called.
Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
Is that an aerial photograph that includes the retreated Twin Lakes complex?
Yes, it is.
Can you show the members of the jury first where the complex is with the laser pointer, if you would?
Right here.
Okay. And show them your location when you first received the dispatch.
Right here.
All right. And can you show them what route you took to get to the complex?
Sure. I would have gone down Reinhardt, northbound on Reinhardt to Oregon, down Oregon to the front entrance right here.
All right. Let me ask you to look at State's Exhibit 1. Do you recognize that to be a aerial photograph of the retreated Twin Lakes complex itself?
Yes, I do.
All right. Can you show the members of the jury where you went first when you entered the complex?
Through the front gates here, down through here. This is Twin Trees.
And I think you said you went first to 1231. Was there an update to the location after you got in the complex?
1231 was what I was originally given, so I arrived there first.
Can you show approximately where 1231 is?
Right in this area.
Okay. And where did you go?
From there, I was given an update from an address on Retreat View, advising that the incident was taking place behind that location.
All right. And do you recall the address on Retreat View Circle that you were given?
2821 Retreat View.
All right. So where did you go?
Down Twin Trees to Retreat View, and the address would have been over in this area.
All right. As you
I
were
went
en
to
route
the
to the
address
2821
for-
address, did you stop anywhere and observe things or use your flashlight?
I did.
Or spotlight. Where was that?
Down here in between the sets of townhomes.
Okay. And what did you do at that location?
I used the spotlight on the patrol vehicle to shine it down that walkway
All right. Did you get out of your car or were you sitting in the car and you can maneuver it from inside your car?
inside the car.
All right. And what did you see when you shined your spotlight down there?
Towards the end of the walkway, I saw at least one person standing outside.
Could you see anything more than that other than a person standing outside?
Not from where I was, no, sir.
All right. So did you continue around then on Retreat View Circle to the 2821 address?
Yes, sir.
Show the members of the jury then again about where you parked and what you did when you got out of your car.
I parked roughly in this area here.
And where did you go?
As I exited, I went around to the left to go in between the townhomes on the walkway.
All right. What were the lighting conditions like when you got
Four.
in between and behind the townhomes?
It was dark.
Did you have a flashlight with you?
I did.
All right. And did you use that?
I did.
What were the weather
Let's deal
conditions
with the
like?
light.
It was raining.
And
When you got behind the townhomes, did you see anyone?
I did.
How many people did you see?
I saw at least two people standing and then one person on the ground.
And show the members of the jury approximately where the two people were who were standing up.
Approximately in this area here.
All right. And the person on the ground, where was that person?
In the grassy area, in the grassy area to the left of the sidewalk.
Okay. And can you just shine your light in that approximate area?
Sure. Roughly in this area.
Very good. And you have
And your
indicated to the left of the
window.
sidewalk.
Yes,
Did you shine your flashlight on the person who was on the ground?
I did.
And how was that person positioned?
Face down.
Could you see the person's hands?
No, I could not.
Did you later learn that person's name to be Trayvon Martin?
I did.
Did you approach Trayvon Martin at that time?
I did not.
Why not?
Because I was in contact with one of the gentlemen on the sidewalk.
Let me show you State's Exhibit 5. Does that give a general idea of the lighting conditions absent the flash of the light from the camera?
Yes, it does.
And State's Exhibit 77, do you recognize that?
I
Morning.
do.
Is that an accurate depiction of Trayvon Martin's body when you shined your flashlight on it?
Yes.
All right. You said you came into contact with one of the people who was standing up. Did you later learn that person's name to be George Zimmerman?
I did.
And do you see George Zimmerman? Your Honor, could you turn the lights? Do you see George Zimmerman in court this afternoon?
I do.
Is he standing to my left?
Yes, yes.
All right. Your Honor, that's the record reflect that the witnesses identified the defendant. Did the defendant appear to be having any trouble standing when you first made contact with him?
No, I did not.
Did he appear to be having any trouble balancing when you first made contact with him?
No, sir.
Did you say anything to the defendant when you made contact with him?
I did.
And what was that?
I asked him if he had seen what happened,
And what did he say?
that he did.
Did you ask him any further questions?
I did.
What was that?
I asked if the subject on the ground had been shot and if he had seen who shot him.
And what did the defendant, how did the defendant respond to that?
He said that he did and he was still armed. He's still armed.
When the defendant, when you asked him those questions, did he appear to have any trouble understanding what you were asking?
No,
When he responded to your questions, did you have any trouble understanding his responses?
no, sir.
When the defendant said that he was still armed, what did you do?
I unholstered my service weapon, at which point he complied with my commands and he was secured in handcuffs.
All right. And did he actually show you in some fashion where his gun was?
He did.
Did he have his hands in the air when he did that?
He did.
Where was the defendant's gun?
On his right hip.
And did you handcuff the defendant?
I did.
Do you recall whether or not you handcuffed him in front or in back?
In back.
All right, and why did you do that?
It's policy.
Did you remove the defendant's gun from his person?
Yes, I did.
Was it in a holster?
Yes, it was.
And when you removed the defendant's gun, did you actually take the gun or both the gun and the holster?
The gun and the holster.
And what did you do with the gun and the holster when you removed it? Where did you put it?
It was currently on me because I was away from my patrol vehicle.
All right, where did you put it on your person?
It's tucked in between my magazine pouch and my vest.
Do you recall whether or not the defendant's holster was inside his pants or on the outside of his pants when he showed it to you?
I don't.
Could you see the defendant's gun when you approached him?
No.
Could you see the holster when you approached him?
No.
He had a long jacket on.
All right, what did you do with the defendant after you placed him in handcuffs?
Oh, no.
To the scene in short order after you.
Yes, sir.
You recall who the first officer was who responded after you?
I believe it was Officer Ayala.
And what did Officer Ayala do when he arrived at the scene?
He went to attend to Mr. Martin.
Do you recall any other officers going over to Trayvon Martin's body at that time?
Yes, sir.
Who was that?
Sergeant Ramondo.
Were you wearing gloves when you first made contact with the defendant and removed his holster and firearm from his person?
I was not.
And did you handle the firearm in any special way when you removed it?
No, sir.
Why not?
Why did I not handle it in a certain way?
Yes, sir.
There was not enough time.
It's the heat of the moment.
And did you secure or make safe the defendant's firearm at some point?
I did.
And how did you do that?
I removed the magazine from the firearm and I locked the slide to the rear.
All right. And when you say you removed the magazine, you're talking about a semi-automatic pistol?
Correct.
All right. And when you pulled the slide back or locked it in position to the rear, was there a round in the chamber?
Yes, sir.
What happened to that round when you moved the slide?
It was ejected.
All right. Did you collect it?
I did.
And did you keep that round in all the rounds in the magazine together with the firearm?
Yes.
And where did you put them?
They were secured in my patrol vehicle until I could obtain a gun box.
And what's a gun box?
That's a cardboard box that we use to secure firearms as evidence.
Pretty much a standard box to secure any handgun?
Correct.
All right. And ultimately, what did you do with the ammunition, the magazine, the holster, and the firearm?
It was all submitted into evidence.
And did you at some point turn those that box over to your wife, Diana Smith?
That's correct.
And she was also called to the scene?
Correct.
Aww. Them works together.
Page 154, already in evidence, and ask you to examine that. Do you recognize the contents of that exhibit?
Yes, I do.
All right, what do you recognize that to be?
That would be the handgun, magazine, and holster that I removed
All right, and how do you recognize it to be the same?
because it's secured in the box with my handwriting on it.
All right, and does it have the case information, like you said, your handwriting, case number, et cetera?
Yes.
And just for the jury's sake, will you hold up the, first of all, the firearm, and you know, it still has a gun lock in it. And the holster. And the magazine and rounds. Oh. And that, all of this you turned over to Diana Smith?
Correct.
She was the crime scene technician assigned to the case?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, was fire rescue dispatched to that scene?
Yes, sir.
And they respond to the scene?
Yes, sir.
Was fire rescue allowed to examine and treat the defendant?
Yes, sir.
And were you present for that?
Yes, sir.
What injuries did you observe on the defendant?
The defendant had a bloody nose. He had some lacerations to his head as well as some contusions.
And at some point, while the defendant was in your patrol car, did another Sanford police officer take a picture of the defendant's face?
Yes, sir.
You recall who that was?
It's Officer Mike Wagner. Wagner?
All right. Were you aware at any point that a civilian had taken a photograph of the back of the defendant's head?
Not at that time, no.
All right, so is that something that if it happened, would have happened before you arrived?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, if we could dim the lights again. State's Exhibit 6, is that, again, another depiction of the lighting at the scene absent the light, the flash from the camera?
Yes, sir.
And State's 34, do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
Is that the approximate area that you parked your patrol car on Retreat View Circle?
Yes, sir.
In State's 132, obviously a daylight photograph, is that a photograph of the entrance, the front entrance of the Retreat of Twin Lakes?
Yes, it is.
In State's 133, do you recognize that to be a closer shot of the front entrance of the Retreat of Twin Lakes?
Yes.
In State's 134, is that now a shot going into the complex with the clubhouse in the right of the picture?
Yes.
State's 135, what is that?
That's the front of the clubhouse.
And State's 136, do you recognize that?
That would be the mailbox kiosk.
And State's 137, is that a close-up of the mailbox kiosk by the clubhouse?
Yes, sir.
All right. And State's 138, is that a depiction of the rear gate of the retreat Twin Lakes?
Yes, it is.
Let me show you stage 79. You recognize that?
Yes, sir.
Is that, to your knowledge, the photograph that Officer Wagner took of the defendant when he was seated in your patrol car?
Yes, it is.
In stage 76, does that depict the defendant's head or close to it, fair and accurate depiction of one you came into contact with?
Yes, sir.
His nose looks pretty fucked up.
Do you recall what the defendant was wearing that evening?
Red and black jacket and blue jeans.
When you first made contact with the defendant out of the scene, was his jacket pushed up in any way?
I don't believe so.
Did you see any tear in his jacket?
No, sir.
What, if anything, did you notice about the condition of his jacket?
The back of it was wetter than the front of it, and it was also covered in grass.
Do you recall the condition of his pants?
Vaguely.
You said they were blue jeans.
Yes, sir.
Anything else about the condition of his pants?
Again, the back was wetter than the front.
All right. After rescue had cleaned up the defendant and treated him, what did you do with him?
I transported him to the station
Somebody might have been on
And what was the
their
purpose of you
back.
taking the defendant to the Sanford Police Station?
to be interviewed by the Criminal Investigations Division.
And did you take the defendant directly there?
Yes, sir.
And about how long did that trip take?
Driving time from retreat to the station is roughly 15 minutes.
All right. While you were making the transport, did the defendant say anything else or anything at all about his injuries?
He stated that he felt like he was lightheaded.
And what did you do or say in response to that?
I forwarded him the opportunity to go to the hospital.
And how did you afford the opportunity?
I asked him if he wanted to go to the hospital, if he wanted to go to the station and be reevaluated by FD.
And what did the defendant say when you offered him that?
He wasn't sure what he should do.
And so how was that resolved?
Ultimately, he decided that he didn't want to go
Didn't want to go
to
where?
the hospital.
All right. So did you take him to the station?
I did.
At any time while you were en route with the defendant, did he lose consciousness or faint in any way?
No, sir.
He was sitting
At any
there.
time after arriving at the station, did the defendant complain of any injuries?
No, sir. None of was already additionally on there.
And where specifically did you park when you and the defendant arrived at the station?
In the Sally Port.
And is that the standard area that you would park when
The
you bring
jump
someone to the
garage.
station like that?
Yes.
When you removed the defendant from your car, did he appear to have any trouble balancing or walking?
No, sir.
All right. And was he still handcuffed?
Yes, sir.
Sir, these questions are
Did the
irrelevant.
defendant walk with you inside the station?
Yes, sir.
And was he, again, still handcuffed?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Did he have any trouble walking throughout the station?
No, sir.
Are portions
Hold on. I'm done. We shall.
Is that just you and the defendant walking through one of the interior doors?
Yes, sir.
No, it's not. I wasn't there. Well, now they're walking down the hall. What's the fucking point?
And again, is that just you and the defendant walking through another portion of the police station?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, that's all we need for the lights. Thank you.
Yeah,
Did you take
they
the
took
defendant to
him.
an interview room?
took him to
Was
the
anyone
police
in the
station.
interview room when you placed the defendant in there?
No, sir.
Jesus
Did you
fucking
uncuff
Christ.
the defendant when you placed him in the interview room?
Yes, I did.
Did you offer him something to drink?
I did.
Did you stay in that room with the defendant?
No, sir.
Where did you go?
The room's monitored by one-way glass, so I went around to the other side of the glass.
All right, were you able to see the defendant from the other side of the glass?
Yes, sir.
Did you watch the defendant until someone arrived
Yes,
to
sir.
speak with him?
Yes, sir.
And about how long was that?
How we done?
30 to 40 minutes.
At any time while you were watching the defendant for 30 to 40 minutes through the one-way glass, did he lose consciousness?
No, sir.
Did he appear to have any physical problems of any kind, falling out of the chair, anything like that?
No, sir.
Did he do anything that caused you concern about his health during that 30 to 40 minute period?
No, sir.
I really hope
And who was it who arrived
that
to interview the
this
defendant?
I believe it was Investigator Singleton.
needs
Did
to
you
go
participate in that interview?
somewhere.
No, sir, I did not.
And where were you when
point of
Detective
these
Singleton was speaking with the
questions
defendant?
Back on the other side of the
Really?
one-way glass.
All right, could you hear what they were saying?
need to
Not
have a
enough. You
fucking
can hear people
point.
talking, but it's not enough to make out.
You can't make out what they're saying?
Correct.
All right, thank you, sir. That's all I have.
Thank you, Cross.
Yes, I'm not. Afternoon, officer. How you doing?
Good, how are you, sir?
Thanks for being here today. How long have you been an officer?
Since 2005,
And what was your training? What did you do to become an officer?
I attended the Law Enforcement Academy.
How long a course is that?
That's just shy of 700 hours.
In addition, have you taken any other courses like in community college or anything along the way or even before?
I have attended Seminole State College, yes.
That's just down the street?
Yes, sir.
What type of courses did you take?
It's general education courses.
Any focus on criminal justice, your chosen career?
Not at Seminole State, no, sir.
How long did you want to be a cop before you became one?
Since I was little.
Okay, sort of a life goal for you then?
Yes, sir.
Why is that?
I enjoy helping and educating.
Officer safety, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you came in, did the circle, and actually, almost coincidentally, I guess, you were able to shine a light down that entire sort of alleyway towards where this event actually occurred, right?
Yes, sir.
And noticed at least one person towards the end?
Yes, sir.
Could you even tell who it was at that point?
No, sir.
So you pull out your car and then get out, and you take out, how do you equip yourself as you're going out of your car to go to that back alleyway?
Due to the lighting, I grabbed a flashlight.
Okay. I talked to another officer before you, and he said that his gun actually has a flashlight on it. Was that the way yours was set up, or
Yes, my gun does have a flashlight on it.
was that what you used? No.
No, sir, I used an actual standard flashlight.
So when you first came around that corner heading over towards the scene, did you know that was the scene where the shooting occurred?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay. So when you first came up on the scene, you had your flashlight out?
Yes, sir.
Had you taken out your service revolver yet?
Not at that point, no, sir.
Tell me what you first see when you come on scene.
I saw Mr. Zimmerman stand on the sidewalk. There may have been somebody out there with him, and I saw Trayvon laying in the grass.
Okay. And when you say sidewalk, there was a walkway that you sort of came down from your car, correct?
Correct. Sidewalk makes a T.
There's a T intersection.
Right.
As you came around that corner, can you sort of orient us to where near the T or how far down that T Mr. Zimmerman was?
If you came around the side of the building to the top of the T, it was approximately 30 feet.
30 feet from the T intersection?
Correct.
Very close by to where Trayvon Martin's body was, right?
Yes, sir.
Within feet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was he doing?
Who?
Mr. Zimmerman.
He was standing on the sidewalk.
Did he look towards you as you were coming towards him?
Yes.
Do you remember at that point whether or not there was anybody else present?
There may have been, but I'm not 100% certain.
Okay. And flashlight on Mr. Zimmerman at that point?
Yes, sir.
And could you tell what he was wearing, the clothes that we talked about, the orange red jacket?
Yes, sir.
At that point, could you see the injuries to his nose when you first had the flashlight on him?
Yes, sir.
And were they similar as to the picture that we seen a little while ago?
Yes, sir.
Even more with the actual bleeding at that point, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And his eyes were watered?
Yes, sir.
Both eyes, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what did you first say to him?
I asked him if he had seen what happened.
And his response?
Yes.
Did that seem like an appropriate response? Anything wrong with the way he answered you?
No, sir.
Next, what did you ask him?
If he had seen if the young man had been shot, and if he had seen who shot him.
And how did he respond?
That he did. That he did, and that he was still alive.
Already said this.
At that point, what's your response to find out that somebody involved in a shooting is right there in front of you armed?
At that point is when I unholstered my service weapon.
And take it out?
Correct.
That's protocol, is it not?
Correct.
Again, it's officer safety is your number one
Right.
charge, because without that, you can't do anything else.
Correct.
Can't help anyone else.
Correct.
Okay. Pointed at him?
Yes, sir.
And again, that's appropriate, correct?
Yes, sir.
You did not point it at him because of any immediate threat that he posed to you, correct? He didn't challenge you in any way, did he?
No, sir.
Matter of fact, he was completely cooperative, was he not?
Yes, sir.
But protocol is you arm yourself and make sure that you have it on him to take care of the situation.
Yes, sir.
And what did you next ask him?
As he was telling me that he had shot him and he was still armed, was when he kind of leaned over to expose the firearm.
So if I were to do that, then for just a moment, tell me, I could have you do it, I'm going to try, but the gun was on his right hip, I think you testified?
Correct.
So this jacket is longer than the one he was wearing, right?
Yes, sir.
But if we flipped it up sort of a silly way, he went like this.
Yes, sir.
And just by this movement was able to be enough.
The hands going up and the leaning over.
Okay, so sort of like that?
Right.
And in just doing that movement, that was enough of a movement where the gun was exposed, correct?
Correct.
The jacket didn't cover the gun by more than a few inches, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So any movement up of the jacket, even that small movement that he did by leaning over, exposed the gun, right?
Correct.
And had the jacket been ridden up in any form or fashion, the gun would have been exposed, right?
I would imagine so, yes.
So, you remember if he had a cell phone in his hand or not?
I don't recall.
Okay. In any case, he showed you his gun, kept his hands in the air, didn't he?
Correct.
That's what you told him to do?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you do at that point now that you have a flashlight, a gun, and you see another gun?
I asked Mr. Zimmerman to put his hands on top of his head, interlock his fingers,
Okay.
at which point I reholstered, made contact, hands-on contact with Mr. Zimmerman, and placed him in handcuffs.
Okay. You leave the gun until you get his hands secured?
Yes, sir.
And that's protocol as well?
That's choice.
Okay. He didn't resist in any way, did he?
No, sir.
And I guess that not resisting is you have him like this, interlocked, correct?
Correct.
Then you would either turn him around or go behind him?
To handcuff him?
Yeah.
I was behind him.
Right. Take one arm, get it back, take
Correct.
the other arm. You've, of course, been in, I would imagine, hundreds of situations having to handcuff people, correct?
Yes, sir.
And most people, I'll let you answer it. What percentage of people at least offer some resistance to you when you're trying to get their arms behind the back?
Object to the relevance of anyone else.
Have you had other people resist getting their arms behind the back?
Same objection, Your Honor, relevance.
At this point, I don't want to speak to you.
Well, then
Respond.
please approach.
I'll rephrase it.
Okay.
Let me rephrase it. Did Mr. Zimmerman offer any response whatsoever to your cuffing him behind his back?
Any response of resistance?
Yeah, did he respond? Did he resist at all? If I
No.
said response, I apologize. Did he
No.
resist at all?
No, sir.
Complied with that command of yours immediately
Yes, sir.
and completely?
Yes, sir.
once you had him secured, then you were able to secure his firearm?
Yes, sir.
And I think a point was made that at that point, your focus, even more so than other people involved, is to secure the firearm, correct?
Correct.
And though in a perfect world, you might have been able to put on gloves, you didn't have the time then, you just grabbed the gun. And I think you said you put it between one of your clips and your vest?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was necessitated by the circumstances, wasn't it?
That is correct.
That was, again, primary goal number one at that point.
Yes, sir.
Okay. At that point, as your first contact to Mr. Zimmerman, did he seem angry?
No, sir.
Did he seem frustrated?
No, sir.
Did he seem spiteful of anything that was going on?
No, sir.
Any ill will or hatred at all that you saw him exude as you first saw him, literally moments after the event?
No, sir.
Any concern about him at all, except for his injuries?
No, sir.
Even though he had that obvious injury to his nose, did you see any injuries to the back of his head yet?
While I was securing him, yes, I was
So
able to.
as you got behind, you could see the blood dripping down the back of his head?
Correct.
So even with those injuries, did he seem agitated?
No, sir.
There has been testimony that he was seemingly calm. Did he come across that way to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Having just gone through what he went through, and now that you know, having just shot somebody, did his behavior to you just seem strange?
No, sir.
Just usual?
I wouldn't say usual.
Okay. Not, well, was it particularly unusual,
No, sir.
even for those circumstances?
No, sir.
He didn't think that didn't come across to you as being cavalier, did he?
No, sir.
Or just uncaring?
No, sir.
Fairly appropriate for what you now know he had just gone through?
Correct.
So you secure the gun,
Yes, sir.
and then what's the next thing that you do?
I had Mr. Zimmerman have a seat in the rear of my patrol car.
Okay, let's talk about sort of the walk over. My understanding, again from other testimony, is that another officer came on scene fairly quickly behind you. Do you recall that?
That's correct.
Do you recall who it was?
Officer Ayala.
Ayala? And you had control of Mr. Zimmerman, and that became your now task, correct?
Correct.
And was it true that Officer Ayala took over the situation of dealing with the other person, now known as Mr. Martin?
That's correct.
And as you were going, anything else that you recall Mr. Zimmerman saying to you at the scene before you started walking towards the car?
Not before, no, sir.
Okay. As you were walking towards the car, didn't he utter something to you, sort of voluntarily?
Yes, sir.
And what did he say?
He stated to me that he was yelling for help and that nobody would come help him.
And how long after you first saw him did that happen? Within a minute?
It was a few minutes.
Okay. As long as it took to do what we just talked about?
Correct.
And then because as soon as you had him cuffed, you secured the gun, right?
Right.
Turned him around and walked him towards the car.
Correct.
The car was 30 yards away,
Approximately.
and it was during that walk, actually almost immediately upon walking towards the car, that he uttered that to you, right?
It wasn't very long after, no, sir.
He actually said that to you twice, didn't he?
Correct.
Second time was after you got to the car?
That's correct.
Tell me how he said that. Was it as, tell me how he said that.
It was almost a confusion. It's
Like,
like,
I kept, well, tell me.
it's basically what it was, sort of a confused look on his face.
Like he didn't know why, after screaming for help, nobody would come help him?
Correct.
That's common speculation.
I'll rephrase it, Your Honor. It came across to you as though he was confused.
That's correct.
You had testified a little while ago about Mr. Zimmerman's condition. We've talked about his injuries, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you also said that the back, particularly the back of his jacket, was wet.
Yes, sir.
Of course, it was raining on and off that evening, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Was the back noticeably more wet than the rest of his body?
Yes, sir.
As though he had been laying in grass on his back?
That's correct.
And he actually also had pieces of grass on his back as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell with blue jeans that the back of his blue jeans were wet as well, or
It appeared to be a little bit darker.
a little bit darker than the front?
Correct.
Evidencing to you what in the darkness?
That he had been laying on his back.
And that his jeans were wet as well in the back?
Correct.
So you get him to the car, which my understanding is that you stayed with him the entire time?
I did.
Again, that's your charge at that point, correct?
Correct.
So you were there when the medical personnel came and treated him?
I was.
Did he say anything, well, did he say anything about the facts of the case to the medical personnel?
No, sir.
When you first arrested him, when you first detained him, did he ask for a lawyer?
No, sir.
As far as you know, all the time you were with him, did he ever ask for a lawyer?
No, sir.
So you have him in the car, medical personnel sort of deal with him and finish with him, correct?
Correct.
Were you waiting for them to finish so that you could continue on with what you had to do, which at that point became transporting him?
Correct.
Okay, so that was mainly your reason for waiting around. Let them finish, and then continue on?
You have to wait if they decide if they're going to transport or not
And how was that decision accomplished?
through the paramedics.
And were you there? Were you listening?
I can overhear bits and pieces. I was
Okay.
kind of pushed back because there was a crowd around the doorway of the car.
Including the paramedics?
It was a crowd of paramedics.
Gotcha. Mr. Zimmerman still in the backseat of your car
Correct.
with his legs out on the ground,
That's correct.
and then the paramedics attending to him.
Correct.
Do you know which one made the decision to transport or not?
Which paramedic? I do not. Okay.
But it seems that the decision to release him back to you was what was done.
Yes.
Correct? Did you have any impact on that? Like, I want to get him to the station. Are we done here? What's going on?
No, sir.
Okay, left that in their hands.
Yes, sir.
So he's then released to you,
Correct.
and from in the backseat of the car. At some point, did you actually have to help him get up out of the car for the rest of the examination, where you sort of lifted him up? He was still, I'm sorry, let me start. He was still cuffed in the backseat of the car, correct?
Correct.
And as he was being treated by medical personnel, you still had to have him cuffed.
He was still handcuffed. Yes.
But at that point, all you know is that he's acknowledged having shot somebody,
Correct.
and you're not going to release somebody under those circumstances just yet.
Correct.
So when the medical personnel wanted him lifted up to check the rest of him, did you help lift him up?
No, sir.
Do you know if another officer did?
I don't recall.
Do you know how it happened with the medical personnel? If you
It
were
may have been two of the paramedics lifted him up.
Okay. Do you remember that happening?
I remember him standing up, but I don't remember who.
Okay.
It wasn't me.
Anyway, that's finished. He's now in the backseat of the car, still cuffed,
Correct.
and you're taking him back to his Sanford Police Department.
That's correct.
And tell me again of the conversation about feeling lightheaded.
He said that he felt lightheaded, had a headache while he was in the backseat of the patrol car.
Did that seem to be consistent with his injuries to you?
Yes, sir.
And did you then call over to Sanford Police Department to figure out what to do with him now that he might have to go to the hospital?
I called the supervisor that was on scene,
All right. Do you recall who that was?
Sergeant McCoy.
And tell me the conversation with Sergeant McCoy.
I explained to her the comment that he had made about feeling lightheaded. She advised me if he wants to go to the hospital, we'll transport him to the hospital. If not, we'll take him to the station.
Okay. Did you have a discussion with Mrs. Zimmerman that though you could transport him to the hospital, the expenses of that would be on his shoulders?
I don't recall that, no, sir.
They would, in fact, though, you would not, SPD doesn't cover expenses if he goes to the hospital, right?
I don't believe so.
And then we've learned, we've seen the pictures, I'm not going to put them back up right now, but there was one picture after Mrs. Zimmerman had been cleaned up, correct?
Correct.
Those pictures were taken after midnight that night, were they not?
I don't know what time they were taken, but it was after.
After the initial interview with Detective Singleton?
Correct.
Do you know who cleaned him up at SPD?
While at the station, he was given a bottle of water and some tissues.
Oh, to sort of clean himself off?
Correct.
And is that then how it went from the first picture we saw, the one with him with the blood all over him, to the one where the blood is gone?
He was cleaned up some by the fire department on scene, and then while he was at the station.
Okay. Was there ever a time at Sanford Police Department where there was any other videotaping of him that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir.
Was there ever a time where he needed any physical assistance from you or whatever in helping, leaning against a wall or doing anything like that?
No, sir.
And you watched him for about 30, I think you said 30 or 40 minutes before the investigator came in to talk to him, right?
Correct.
Question him about what had happened?
Yes, sir.
And did you say that you watched that interrogation or interview?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was he cooperative?
He appeared to be so.
Okay. Did he ever ask for a lawyer during that event?
I don't know.
Had he asked for one, the interview would have stopped, correct?
Yes, sir.
We might just have a moment. Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Just very good, thank you. Officer Smith, you were asked if when you came into contact with the defendant, he seemed to be angry or frustrated, and you said that he did not.
Correct.
Do you know what was going on in his head when he pulled the trigger for the bullet that killed Trayvon Martin?
Let me interrupt with an objection. I think that's going to be speculation, and I'll object to that. Your
Okay,
Honor.
sustained. This is speculation.
Do you know what he was thinking before you arrived?
Your Honor.
Well, that's a yes or
Similarly,
no. That would, if the answer is yes, it calls for speculation.
if the answer is no, I would suggest it's not relevant.
Okay, sustained.
You were asked about whether or not his firearm was visible when he exposed it to you like this,
Yes.
and you had a flashlight on him.
Yes, sir.
Do you know if his firearm was visible when he was out at the location where Trayvon Martin's body was in that lighting?
That I don't know.
You said at the station you offered the defendant some tissues, like Kleenex,
Yes, sir.
to clean himself.
Yes, sir.
Did anybody else clean him at the station?
Not that I saw.
Because I'd like to publish one more photograph, if I could. Officer Smith, I'm showing you stage 46. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the way the defendant appeared when he was at the police station after he had been cleaned up?
Yes, sir.
All right, and that was taken on the evening of the 26th, or perhaps just after midnight into the 27th?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Judge, that's all I have.
A very brief follow-up. I think it was just a mistake, but I want to clear it up. Mr. Guy, when he suggested his maneuvering for the picture, actually lifted up his left arm. You had testified, however, pretty certainly that the gun was on his right side, correct?
Correct.
And that he lifted up his right arm.
Correct.
So you have no question in your mind whatsoever, do you, that the gun was located on his right hip?
No, I don't.
Okay. Mr. Guy's putting it up his left arm was just a mistake as far as you can tell?
Correct.
Thanks. Nothing further.
And may we redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, may Officer Smith be excused?
He may.
Thank you very much. You're excused. Call your next witness, please.
So we call Lindsay Folgate.
You solemnly swear affirm the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do.
Okay, we'll get you a pad of paper. Just one or? You may proceed.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, Lindsay Folgate.
And could you spell those names?
Yes, LINDZEE
What is your occupation?
I'm a physician assistant
And where are you employed?
at Altamont Family Practice.
Is that located in Altamont Springs, Seminole County, Florida?
Correct.
Can you briefly tell us about your education and training regarding your occupation, ma'am?
Certainly. I am a physician assistant, meaning
I'm sorry, we've had problems with that microphone. You need to lean up a little bit as you make it adjusted.
I'm a physician assistant. I underwent 4 years of an undergraduate degree in a bachelor's of health science. And then subsequent to that, I did 2 years at a master's of physician assistant studies program at the University of Florida.
And you mentioned you obtained your master's when, ma'am?
I obtained my master's from June of 2006 to June of 2008.
And your master's was in physician's assistant studies?
Correct.
Are you certified by State Florida?
Correct. Yes, I am.
Please explain what you do and how it is different from a nurse and a doctor.
Okay, we can start with a nurse first. As a physician assistant, again, I have my master's degree, which is a different level of training than a nurse. I am taught on a medical model in the physician assistant program, and the purpose after my schooling is to go out and to be able to have direct patient contact with patients and be able to diagnose and treat their illnesses. So that's a little bit different than what a nurse can do.
And how about a doctor? How are you different than a doctor?
As a physician goes, as a physician, you have 4 years of a medical school degree, and then you go on to do a residency. So we're trained on a similar model, although ours is scaled down to a 2-year program, where for the first year I'm in a didactic school year, which is mainly a group of studies. And then the second year is our clinical year, where we do different basic rotations.
And are you able to do everything that a doctor does except what?
I'm able to do most things that a physician can do, except in the state of Florida, I cannot sign off solely by myself on controlled substances.
And do you have your own patients?
I do.
How long have you been a physician assistant at Altamont Family Practice?
From April of 2011 to the present time.
Can you tell us how Altamont Family Practice is set up? I'm assuming if you're a patient, you come in, what are the process that a patient coming in would be treated?
From the beginning, you would like that?
Yeah, just very briefly.
Okay, briefly, if you were a patient to come into our office, you would enter through the doors, you would greet our front desk staff, they would obtain your insurance and license information, they would give you the paperwork if it had not already been filled out as a new patient. Once that is received, the insurance is verified, then the chart gets put up to be taken back. The medical assistant would come and get the chart, they would take the patient back, they would do vital signs, and then they would get a basic note of why they were being seen in the office that day.
And at that point, then, would you become involved with that patient in treating or assessing the injuries or whatever was wrong with the patient?
Yes,
Did you have a patient by the name of George Zimmerman? Was he a patient of yours at Altamont Family Practice?
he was.
And do you see that person in the courtroom today, ma'am?
I do.
Okay, is that the person just stood up?
That is.
Right,
Yes.
reflect the witness identified defendant George Zimmerman.
The record will so reflect.
Ms. Folgate, your first contact with the defendant George Zimmerman, was that on August the 19th of 2011?
Correct.
And in terms of dealing with him the first time, was a history obtained from the defendant, Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay. And do you review and personally go over the information that, in this case, Mr. Zimmerman provided to you or to your assistant, and making sure that you are documenting everything you need to in order to treat him?
Yes.
In order to get what medication and what other possible benefit you can provide in assisting him in whatever he has a problem with?
Correct.
Okay. What I want to do is introduce at this time State Exhibit, make sure I get the right one. State Exhibit 195, which is the August 19th, 2011. If I'm going to approach the witness.
You approach, yeah.
Yes.
Approach the court, if you want.
Come on.
Or the contention that the medical records themselves should be admitted. I think that her testimony, to the extent this court perceives it to be relevant, should be admitted, but not the medical records. And if in fact the medical records are going to be allowed, that they would need to be redacted much more severely than they are. I think this court redacted them for discovery purposes initially, but other matters would now need to be further redacted. And not to argue the state's case, is that which documents the injuries.
Right.
And there were some other previous records that talk about some exercising. And I understand the state's position on that. The court can make its own ruling. But short of that, I don't think that any other words or comments, history would be relevant nor admissible.
I guess we'll take it one at a time, Your Honor. That's the exhibit for you, which I believe is State Exhibit 195. It's dealing with the August 19, 2011 treatment of this defendant. This would establish, I guess, if I'm to, through the court asking Mr. O'Mara, he has stated he has no objection to the witness testifying about such matters, but does not want the record itself in, if I understood correctly.
I believe the witness can testify to relevant matters. And I think if we were to look at this first page, I think there's a sentence or two that can be arguably relevant.
So,
But everything else, I would argue, as a medical record, quite protected under our statute, would not be admissible unless it's particularly relevant. So I could just, you can read as quickly as I can. Right? There's just things in there that are not relevant to this case. And there are two sentences, I think, beginning with started to exercise.
Why don't we come up to the bench and we can go over these page by page. Ready for the jury?
Yes, sir.
Let's go ahead and bring the jury in.
Jury's present, Your Honor.
Exercise intensely with MMA, but this has not helped.
And were you able to determine MMA as being mixed martial arts?
Yes,
And it would also have the encounter date, which would have been August 19, 2011 at 1:29 p.m.?
correct.
Okay. In terms of the highlighted parts only, can you read the first part, the first sentence of the highlighted part?
Of the history of present illness?
Yeah, just the highlighted part only.
Seen in the office to establish care, referred through insurance provider.
In that same paragraph, it also has a highlighted part towards the bottom of that paragraph. You see that?
Yes. Difficulty with falling and maintaining sleep. Started to exercise intensely with MMA, but this has not helped.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last sentence? Started to,
Difficulty with falling and maintaining sleep. Started to exercise intensely with MMA, but this has not helped.
and were you able to determine MMA as being mixed martial arts?
Yes,
On the notes, I believe there are two sentences that are highlighted. Is that correct, in yellow?
yes.
And could you read those two sentences?
Patient here to establish care. Patient was referred by his insurance list of providers.
Ma'am, I'm going to now provide to you, if I could, with the court's permission, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
You saw subsequent to that, and I want to refer specifically to a date, which is September 23rd of 2012. And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 196.
That's 2011.
I apologize, 2011. Thank you, Your Honor. You see that exhibit before you, ma'am?
I do.
Your treatment, I'm sorry, you would have been in contact with the defendant again, George Zimmerman, on that day?
Correct.
And when you say contact, you yourself actually had contact with the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. On that day also, when you saw him, you gathered just, that exhibit's got the regular information, George M. Zimmerman, 27 years old, male, white, and the date, September 23rd, 2011 at 1:52 PM, is that correct?
Correct.
And I believe there's a highlighted part in that page where you've got in terms of social history exercise, is that correct?
Correct.
And what did you notate there in terms of social history exercises to the defendant, George Zimmerman?
That he was involved in mixed martial arts 3 days per week.
Right, what's witness? Let me get that document back from you if I could, and let me show you State Exhibit 194. You would have seen him on I guess on that date when you treated him, did you, history was obtained in terms of what he was there for?
Yes.
Right, personal complaints of an earache or whatever, would that have been the same?
It would have, would have been noted on the notes, and then yes, we would have discussed what the concerns that he had.
Okay. So the history that would have been taken, would that have been first by a medical assistant, so you would have an idea of when you talked to him, what he was there for?
Exactly.
Okay. And if you could, let's go over in terms of the way you would have dealt with him in terms of, I know you've got records and they may not be in exact order in the way you treated him, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, because this exhibit is a printout of the combined records.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So if we could, let's start at the very beginning. Your first contact with him, what did you deal with in terms of what you dealt with and what he said he didn't say?
On this
I'm
exact
bored.
visit?
I know
Yes,
you guys
ma'am.
are bored.
On February the 27th of 2012 at
Sorry,
11:08
I'm
area.
So what would have happened initially is the patient would have been brought back to the room and had vitals done, and then a brief history would have been taken by the medical assistant. I then will review that brief history, so I have an idea of exactly what I'm going in to see. And then while I enter the room, then we discuss his certain complaints that he was there for.
So I guess as it's done, I'm assuming every time somebody gets to the doctor, vital signs would have been taken first?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next part would have been his patient is here for whatever, and patient states something, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if you could, I think that's on page 2 of those records.
Mhm.
Patient is here for what? Go ahead and tell us.
Patient is here for a return note for work. Patient was in fight on 2/26/2012. Patient was punched in nose and has 2 lacerations in the back of head. 911 was called and EMT said patient's nose was broken.
I gather when we're talking about right here, notes, this is what Mr. Zimmerman is taking is telling the medical assistant?
Correct.
Okay. So he's telling the medical assistant that he's there for a return note for work,
Correct.
that he was in a fight on February the 26th of 2012, that he was punched in the nose and has 2 lacerations in the back of the head, that 911 was called and an EMT said his nose was broken.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Mhm.
And then you would have reviewed that and then actually had contact with Mr. Zimmerman.
Correct.
Okay. So I think we now go to I've got it as a front page. I don't know if that's correct. Would that be history of present illness?
That is where I would begin.
Okay.
Yes.
So you actually would have had contact with him at that time.
Correct.
And I gather you talked to him. He tells you what his ailment is, and then you would have treated it.
Correct.
Okay. So if you could tell us at that time when you're talking to him, what he tells you.
When we are talking during that time, basically what I've written in the note is what he is telling me. And that states that say that during the altercation, he had a weapon, that he was authorized to carry a firearm, and he fired at the attacker, killing him. He goes on to mention that he was evaluated by EMS at the scene, and he states his lacerations were cleaned during that time. He was told that he had a broken nose and denies being taken to the hospital. He then returned to work and was told he needed a police report and medical clearance to return to work. And then I go into my review of systems and asking him certain questions that he would confirm or deny.
So you first get his statement as to what happened and why he's there.
Correct.
Okay. And I think the first part is he states that he's complaining of nasal pain.
Correct.
Okay. Nasal pain would be his nose.
Correct.
Okay. And then he tells you the history, and then you then diagnose. What do you do? You go over all the parts of his body, or what do you do?
After we discuss the history, I ask certain questions, which we clarify as our review of systems, which would be on the following page.
Okay.
Once we go over the review of systems, I'm basically asking him to confirm or deny certain symptoms that he may be having at the time. And then I move on to the physical examination, which is where I determine what injuries were noted. And then based off of that, what would need to be treated.
All right. So let's go back a second and then talk about review of symptoms. Go ahead and cover those.
Okay. So during the history of present illness, I again asked him if he was having any headaches, change in visual acuity, slurred speech, dizziness, or gait abnormality. And then I also asked him, was he having any nausea or vomiting? And then associated with that, any abdominal pain. I then go through and look at the review of systems as well, as this is a drop-down box menu in our electronic medical record system, and review any other symptoms that may have been involved.
All right. So let's take those one by one.
Okay.
He in terms of you asking him, he denied HA. What does HA mean?
HA means headache.
Okay. So he denies having any headache.
Correct.
Change in VA. What does that mean?
VA means visual acuity, so no change in vision.
He denies any slurred speech. What does that mean?
That would mean exactly what it says, but any slurred speech, and sometimes I'll rephrase that to patients as, are you talking any more abnormal than what you would have normally?
He denies dizziness. That's an obvious one, but let's make sure for the record what that means.
Clarifying to see if he had any dizziness, meaning he felt off balance for any reason.
And gait abnormality, meaning he's able to walk fine, no problems walking.
Exactly, and sometimes I'll clarify that on layman's terms, meaning are you walking as if you were drunk or staggering?
Okay. Then I notate on the history of present illness, he admits to occasional nausea when thinking about the violence last night, but denies abdominal pain. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
He was telling me that when he was reflecting on what happened that night, that he was having some nauseous feelings. And I would then further ask, are you having abdominal pain, to clarify whether the nausea was coming from an abdominal pain symptom or from a psychological factor.
And what was your determination as to that?
That it was not from his abdominal system, that it was more from a psychological factor.
You notated complaints of left SI joint tenderness since the event. Go ahead and tell us what that means.
The SI joint is the sacroiliac joint, and he has mentioned that he was having some tenderness on the left side since the altercation that night.
And you also notated he denies numbness or tingling or incontinence. Tell us about that.
These are follow-up questions I would ask on anyone who would complain of back pain or SI joint tenderness to make sure that there was nothing more severe going on. So was he having any numbness or tingling into his extremities, or was he having any bowel or bladder incontinence?
Then when you do the drop down on your computer, I guess when you say drop down, or you're going through in terms of constitutional symptoms, right? He denies fevers or chills.
Correct.
His eyes, he doesn't have blurred vision or
Diplopia means double vision.
ears, nose, mouth, and throat. Tell us about that.
He admits to nose pain, but has no hearing loss or tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears.
Why is the
Sometimes I do.
significance of that? Tell us about that. What are you looking for?
The significance of the tinnitus?
Yeah.
Just making sure with the trauma that he is telling me he
There's
sustained,
one
would there be
day
any
that it was all
significant
day. I
side
had
effects from
it
that, and that one of the
ringing
results
in
could be
my
hearing
ear.
loss or
I thought
ringing in the
I was
ears?
gonna
So he has no ringing in the ears or hearing loss.
No complaints of that.
I'm sorry, no complaints of that. And that's all you can go on that time. Is that
Correct.
Okay. But you've got in here admits nose pain. I think we're going to get to this in a little while.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Cardiovascular, tell us about that.
He denies palpitations, meaning any abnormal or irregular heartbeats, and he denies any chest pain or chest pressure.
Respiratory.
Respiratory denies any shortness of breath.
Okay. Tell us about the next few other ones.
The gastrointestinal denies abdominal pain, nausea, and or vomiting related to the gastrointestinal system.
Okay.
The integumentary, that's the skin. So I put in there admits scalp lacerations because that is one of his concerns. Neurological will be next. Admits to head trauma, as he's telling me that he sustained a head trauma that night based on the story that he's telling me, but denies tingling, numbness, weakness, headache, dizziness, speech difficulty, gait disturbance, or loss of consciousness. And then the last part would be psychiatric. He admits to stress surrounding the event, but denies suicidal thoughts or attempts.
Go back to neurological in terms of admits head trauma. Why are you concerned about whether he has difficulty with speech or he's got headaches or whether he's lost consciousness? What's the significance of that?
The significance of those review of systems or symptoms would be more concerning or lead me to down another line of questioning, and that would further potentiate this certain treatment that I would elicit.
I'm sorry. I interrupted you. So you have no concerns in terms of he says he's not losing consciousness. He's able to write, able to function fine. He has no problem in terms of concentration or weakness or headaches or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay. If you had complained of those, what steps would you have taken in treating those if those existed?
It would also be based off my physical exam. So I would take those symptoms into consideration while I'm doing the physical exam. And pending some of those were apparent, and you would rank those on certain severity, then you would proceed with possible imaging, meaning a picture of the brain.
So at this point, you had no concern about, I know we're going to get to the physical, but based on just this, you have no concern regarding that.
Based on what he's telling me, there is less concern. Correct.
All right, I guess we then, am I skipping a step or are you going now to physical exam?
I would go next to the physical exam.
Okay, if you could just cover that, please, thank you.
No problem. So the first part of the physical exam would be his general appearance. It says he's in no acute distress. Most of the time that means, is he any physical shortness of breath or significant pain at the time? He is obese, and that's based off his body mass index, which takes into account his height and weight. He's
Let me interrupt you. I apologize. Is his height and weight anywhere on here?
His height and weight would be on the first page.
Okay,
In
I
the,
neglected to ask you about that, sorry.
in the vital signs, saying he's 5 foot 7.5 inches and weighs 204 pounds.
5'7" and how much?
7.5, 7.5,
Okay. And then what else? What was his weight?
204 pounds.
Okay. I apologize. I
No
interrupted you.
problem.
Well, that was rude.
You stated also he is obese, and is that based on what now?
That's based off his body
That
mass
is
index, which takes into
rude.
account your height and weight. A BMI
Move
greater than 31
along.
falls into a category of obesity.
What's the next sentence you've got there under general appearance?
He is alert and oriented and appears his stated age.
Anything significant with that?
I would take that into account given the history of the head trauma to make sure that he's alert and is understanding the questions that I'm asking him.
Go ahead.
Next would be head. He's normocephalic, atraumatic. The face is symmetric. 2 scalp lacerations to the occiput, which is the back part of the head, approximately 2 centimeters and 0.5 centimeters,
Where are the
respectively.
lumps at?
Tell me the significance of that.
The significance of the measurement itself.
Yes, yeah. Tell me the measurements, and in terms of use some big words there. Tell me what you mean by those big words there.
Okay. The significant would be 2 lacerations, meaning 2 cuts to the back of his head. And the occiput, again, is the back part of the head. I measure them given his concerns and his complaints to have that documented to make sure that we know, should these not heal appropriately, these were the original size that he came in to be seen for.
And you said 2 centimeters and a 0.5 centimeters. What is that in inches, I guess? Or can you estimate using your finger, I guess, or using your, how small are they?
Okay, 2 centimeters would approximately be about this big, and then 0.5 is much smaller.
And based on your observations and review of those lacerations, did you feel there was anything additional that needed to be done regarding those, like any kind of stitches or anything like that?
That determination is based on how well the skin edges are what we call approximated, which means how well are they together to begin with, and how deep is the laceration itself. Based off of the approximation of the skin margins and the depth of the lacerations, I did not feel that sutures were necessary.
And A laceration, tell us what that means when you say a laceration versus a cut or something like that.
A laceration is basically a more proper term for a cut.
Okay. And you said it wasn't deep enough to require, in your opinion, any stitches or anything. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you said the skin edges were approximately, well, if I've got that right?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me about the eyes.
Eyes, it says PERRLA, which means pupils are equal, round, and reactive to light, and the extraocular movements are intact. So I'm checking his pupils to make sure they're responding to light appropriately, and then we check the extraocular movements, meaning how well are his eyes moving in each direction, and that was normal. And then it says conjunctiva and sclera are clear. The conjunctiva and sclera, for lack of better words, the white parts of your eyes, so making sure that there's no injection into that part. But I did note that he had bilateral black eyes.
And what does that mean to you?
That would mean skin discoloration to the inferior orbit, meaning the bottom portion of the eyes.
Going back to the head, to, I guess, the skull, the scalp, whatever, you notice those lacerations. Did you notice any other trauma to the head at all?
I did not at the time. I don't recall.
Let's talk about the ears, nose, mouth, and throat.
Bruising noted to the nasolabial folds bilateral with swelling. The nasolabial folds would be the folds between the nose and the mouth. And there was some swelling noted there and some bruising, so darkening of the skin. No evidence of septal deviation on visual inspection, meaning the septum, which is the center part of your nose, appeared to be straight and in alignment. No bleeding noted in the nares, which means there was no blood in the nose itself. No hemotympanum to the bilateral ears, which means there's no blood behind the eardrums. And no evidence of tonsillar stones, which was a complaint that he had outside of the current reason that he was there.
So let's talk about the nose itself. No evidence of septal deviation. What does that mean?
So septal deviation, again, would mean, is the alignment of the nose correct?
So his nose is straight, in other words.
Correct.
It is not crooked or in any way damaged to that extent.
Not on visual inspection, no.
I think you've already covered the chest, and as Hardy said, or everything else seemed normal.
Correct.
You talked about the tender left SI, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about that again.
The SI, again, is the sacroiliac joint, which is the space located, for lack of a better word, in the center of your buttocks.
I think you gave him some medicine for the complaint he had, is that correct?
For the SI joint pain, correct.
Yes, and what did you give him?
We gave him Lodine, which is an anti-inflammatory.
By the way, when you saw him regarding those lacerations, did he have any Band-Aids or anything covering them?
He did have one large Band-Aid covering them.
Okay, and I'm assuming, or maybe it's an assumption on my part, did you remove the Band-Aid to look at him?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned that he said, that is, Mr. Zimmerman told you that the EMT had told you that the nose was either broken or possibly broken, is that correct?
That was what I was told, correct.
Based on your examination of his nose, can you say that his nose was broken?
I would say likely broken. It's hard to say definitively based off of the fact that there were no x-rays to show the break itself. However, most of the time, a broken nose can be made clinically as well, and that's based off of the black eyes that we saw, the nasolabial swelling, the bruising.
So you can say it is or it isn't, or you don't know, or?
I couldn't say definitively one way or the other because I have no direct x-ray saying this is exactly where the fracture occurs. But clinically appearing, it appeared to be, yes.
Okay. But it was still perfectly straight.
It was still straight. There was no septal deviation.
I think you've got, in terms of the plan decision-making progress, is that what you would move on to next?
After the physical exam, yes, I would move to the plan and the decision-making process.
You talked about the scalp lacerations, that there was no sutures needed. In other words, you didn't need any sewing up at all,
No
right?
stitches, correct.
Okay. And you stated in terms of broken nose that we discussed it is likely broken, but does not appear to have septal deviation, swelling, and black eyes are typical of this injury, correct?
Correct.
Now, you're there. Did you then recommend something to him in terms of making a definitive determination of whether his nose is broken or whether there would be any problems regarding that?
My recommendation was that he see an ENT, which is an ears, nose, and throat specialist.
And what did he say regarding that?
He told me at the time that he was not going to go to be seen by the ENT.
Regarding the SI joint pain, did you give him some suggestions?
We discussed using the Lodine, which is the anti-inflammatory, to help with the inflammation. And then we discussed heat, ice, and massage.
You had seen him the 3 times we covered here, but you had seen him other times that he complained on a prior occasion of having some back pain or sometimes. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. And had you treated him for that before?
I had. It was related to constipation.
Okay. So it was not related to an injury itself, like a physical injury.
Sorry.
Sorry, I don't
Put
know.
all his business out there.
Oh, I apologize. In terms of laceration to the heads, you mentioned 2 of them.
Mhm.
I got a bald head, so I know what it is to get cut or have the laceration. How do those bleed in distinguishing that from a cut somewhere else in the body? In terms of, is there something with the head, the fact that it bleeds more profusely, or doesn't it? Tell me about that.
The scalp is very vascular, meaning it has many blood vessels there. So a scalp laceration can bleed quite a significant amount more than perhaps somewhere else on the body, depending on the location.
And how about if the person doesn't have any hair?
It doesn't necessarily mean that it will bleed less, but maybe less noticeable because there would be maybe some hair blocking that area.
So if you have hair, it would be have more of an impact of pushing, or you just would notice that there was blood.
Possibly both. You may not notice the amount of blood because it could be getting mixed up with the hair itself. And I guess it would depend on the thickness of your hair to depend on the amount of cushion that would be.
I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Mara.
Yes, thank you. I might. No, I will need a little assistance. Not the easiest. May I recruit you for a moment? Thank you very much, ma'am. Actually, it will be a few minutes before I need this, so yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
I'm going to focus, again, he was a patient of yours for a while before the event where he came to you on February 27th, correct?
Correct.
But just to start with the last question first, he did not have any back pain caused by back injury before this event, correct?
No,
The back injury was actually internal concern that showed itself as a back pain. right?
correct. We believed it was likely related to the constipation when he complained about that in the past.
So that when he came to you on the 27th, that was the first time he had ever complained of back pain.
Yes, this was unrelated.
Okay, let's focus then on that night.
Okay.
The day, make sure I do this right, so give me a moment. This, oh yes, thank you very much, Ron, I apologize. Is this close to how he presented to you that day?
From what I recall, similar?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, this was, just to orient you, this was taken the night before.
Okay.
Maybe 12 hours or so before you saw him.
Okay.
Was that pretty similar to the way he presented to you?
Fairly similar.
Okay.
It's a different picture when you're seeing it on a picture rather than up close, but
Certainly,
Yes.
certainly, and I apologize for that, but, sorry, I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit. Now, first the witness, the exhibits are written evidence. You probably have not seen this picture before, have you?
I have not.
If this person presented himself, you know that to be George Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay, if this person had presented himself to you, looking like this,
Mhm.
what would you have done for him?
If he had come to our office looking like that, we would have cleaned the wounds so we could better evaluate what the type of injuries that are and then go about the same process that we went through and then order the testing based off of that.
Okay, and if you look at this photograph as compared to the one we just identified, I would like to focus your attention to the nose area.
Okay.
Would you,
Relevance and also, she didn't see him like that, so I object this to speculation at this point.
my response, John?
Let me hear the rest of the question.
Would you agree that the swelling that you saw in that picture has gone down from the way it is here?
It looks like that it's decreased slightly.
Is that normal? Let's say that there's a 12-hour, let's say that there's a 4-hour difference, 5-hour difference between this picture and that picture. Is that a normal sort of receding of swelling?
It depends on what he's using to help keep the swelling down. So maybe if he was using anti-inflammatories or icing the area, then potentially yes, the
So
swelling would be less.
would we expect an injury of this significance to look like that 5 hours later? Is that normal,
Yes, it could.
once it's cleaned up?
Correct.
But would you agree that in this picture, that the nose is in fact more swollen than it is in that picture?
It does appear to be, yes.
Why is that? What happens to the body that it heals itself like that?
The body naturally tries to take care of itself if it can, and the body responds to trauma in a certain way, and that is why the body produces swelling. And then as the body is recovering, that's how the swelling resolves. Again, it also depends on the certain extraneous things that you're using, like anti-inflammatories or ice to the area.
So while this may look as though it is now a bone protrusion to the right side of the nose, it's not actually a bone protruding out there, is it?
It's unlikely in the sense that it's resolved and looks like that picture later.
Yet the body swells up at the point of injury, does it not?
It does, it can,
And
yes.
it does that in response to the trauma of the hit, correct?
It can, yes.
And it does that by swelling. And the swelling, if you would, just sort of tell us what the body, why the body swells or how the body swells up in the area of trauma.
The body itself is reacting to the impact of something that's happened. So certain blood can rush to the area or more fluid underneath the skin can rush to that area, and that's what produces the effect of the swelling.
Including lymph fluid, doesn't that sort of wander over and white blood cells?
They can, potentially, that's the purpose of the lymph system to help with infections or foreign bodies, things like that.
Particularly when we know that there's bleeding happening, correct?
Mhm.
Bleeding, you would agree, sort of indicates broken blood vessels?
It can, yes. Blood
And
vessels
would
or
you-
capillaries.
And would you agree that there was bleeding inside is it nares or just
The
the
nares,
nose?
likely there was bleeding inside the nares if you see it coming down the front of the face,
Okay.
yes.
Where does that blood go if you're just standing up like I am and my nose is bleeding?
Normally gravity will pull it down.
How about if I'm laying on my back? Where is the blood going to go?
What will happen is you can swallow some of that back down your throat.
Actually, it can go into the sinuses as well, can it?
It can,
And as it goes back down the sinuses, it goes into the back of your throat,
it can,
and you
correct.
actually can be swallowing your own blood, correct?
You can, that what may give you the taste in your mouth, correct.
The swelling that we've just spoken about is the body's initial reaction to trauma, correct?
It is.
And it only can last maybe just a few hours, correct?
It depends on the level of the trauma and the patient, but yes.
Does that diminish the fact that the body was in fact traumatized as we see in this picture?
Meaning, does it make it any less plausible that the body was attacked?
Yeah.
No,
Okay. It's a natural reaction for the body to begin its healing process immediately, correct?
correct.
And of course, this face was cleaned up after the blood was all removed and can you see, well, you can barely still see the cut just at the top of the bridge of the nose there, correct?
Correct.
Would you acknowledge that there was in fact a larger laceration or cut on the nose here?
There appears to be, but it appears to have blood surrounding the area as well.
Again, once you clean it up, it looks a little bit better.
Correct.
Have you seen this picture before?
I have not.
Okay. Would the scalp bleed in a fashion like this from those two lacerations?
It can. The scalp, again, is very vascular, meaning there are plenty of blood vessels on the scalp surface that could cause bleeding like that.
Would it bleed down the back that way?
Again, gravity would start to pull that down.
Let's spend a moment, Your Honor, the lights, if you would. I want to show you some other pictures of Mr. Zimmerman that night.
Oh, goody, let's.
Now, can you see that photograph?
I can.
Okay. Do you note additional areas of swelling on this picture that you may not have noticed on your physical evaluation? I'm sorry, Your Honor, that is State's Exhibit 57. Let me point you, do you see anything in this area of swelling?
There is swelling there that I can see.
Okay.
Yes.
Would that also possibly have resolved itself in the 12 hours between this picture and when you saw him?
It could have, yes.
Do you see an area up here that seems to be misshapen?
In the photograph, yes, I see that.
Okay. Would that also be an area of swelling?
It's normally an area of swelling. We call those scalp hematomas, where blood can pool under the skin.
Tell me how that occurs. How does a scalp hematoma occur?
A hematoma can occur through trauma, so some sort of trauma to the head that resulted in the collection of blood there or fluid there.
So in effect, in sort of layman's terms, if I was to smash my head against something, let's say I hit this part, the trauma would cause blood or maybe lymph system fluid to flood that area.
Yes,
Similar to the nose, it would go there, do its job, and then sort of recede.
correct.
And that's what causes swelling, as we know it.
Correct.
And that's what caused it here, maybe?
It could, yes.
And that's what caused it up here.
It could, yes.
You see these, right?
Yes,
Those are the lacerations that you identified?
those were the two, correct.
Okay. What is the potential outcome from head trauma like
Very
that?
lumpy head.
It, again, depends on the physical exam of the patient, and you base a lot of that off the physical exam of the patient. But any sort of head trauma can result in an internal injury, meaning bleeding into the brain, skull fractures.
And an internal hematoma, is that dural hematoma?
It depends on where the blood is actually. You can have an epidural or subdural hematoma.
Okay. That may not have external notice, correct? You can have an internal hematoma, subdural hematoma, epidural hematoma, bleeding on beneath the scalp that will resolve itself.
An epidural or subdural hematoma would be below the skull.
Right.
That's the difference between a hematoma, which is above the skull between the skin.
Right. Hematoma outside of skull
Correct.
resolves itself sort of between the skull and the skin.
Correct.
And then subdural, epidural is you actually have gone below the skull and you're just in that dura, which is what cushions the brain.
Correct.
And you could have injuries like this could certainly cause a epidural or subdural hematoma, correct?
Not necessarily the lacerations themselves, but if there was head trauma, completely.
I'm sorry. So if I just went up to this head and cut it with a razor blade or a scalpel, that would not, you would imagine, cause a subdural or epidural hematoma.
No.
But if I took that same skull, unless they smashed it on concrete,
Laceration.
sufficient enough to cause that injury. So smash might be a term of art, but getting that injury by having your head hit against cement, could that cause a subdural, epidural hematoma?
That could, depending on how hard the impact was.
And that would, in fact, be an injury below the skull in the area where the brain is.
Correct.
Which is one of the reasons why you do what you do in your evaluation to make sure that he can still focus his eyes and still speak, because you're concerned at that point with any head trauma that there may be some brain injury.
Correct.
And your charge then at that point is to rule out that possibility, though you would agree that possibility exists whenever you have an injury like this.
It can, yes.
Close up of the same thing, you still see the swelling again up in this area and right in here.
Correct.
Tell me, can you see That injury up there, or that occurrence up there,
I can see what maybe appears to be an abrasion of the scalp.
is that, what would you call that?
What's the difference
Is that
between an
punctate,
abrasion
a
and a
bruising, or
laceration?
It can be, or it depends on what the surface was that maybe caused the injury, and it could be an abrasion, which is basically just a thin layer of the skin coming off.
what are punctate injuries? Just explain that.
Punctate injuries would be injuries to the blood vessels themselves causing punctate bleeding or small sort of capillary bursts like that.
Would that occur if you had your head hit against something as irregular but flat as concrete?
It could.
Is that a way to occur to get those little mini bruisings all over the place?
If it was hit on concrete or anything like that, the rough surface of that could have caused that too.
Okay. Consistent with it being hit on concrete, isn't it?
It can be consistent with that, whether or not that is what was struck on it. I'm sure that can happen on multiple other surfaces as well, but it could be consistent.
Okay. If Mr. Zimmerman were to come to you and say he had that injury and that it occurred because his head was hit on concrete, would it be consistent?
Judge, that's a speculation.
It's-
I think she's already testified.
Okay, I'll move on then. Did you notice any injury right there?
I don't recall that injury.
Can you tell us what that looks like to you?
It looks like it maybe be a scratch of the skin or an abrasion of the skin as well.
And now let's look up here at that injury there. What is that? Can you identify what that is?
It looks like there may be some mild swelling there.
Another bruise?
It's hard to tell if there's an actual bruise or discoloration of the skin, but it does appear there's some swelling.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would we just characterize that in layman's terms? That's a bump on the head?
Correct.
Well, how would that come? How would you get something like that?
Again, it can come from hitting your head on any sort of surface potentially or being struck by something.
Okay. Can you also see the same type of punctate injury right around here?
I can see that.
As far up as here? You see that?
It appears to be.
And as down low as here?
Correct.
As what you testified before, sort of the same?
It appears to be, yes.
And I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm not identifying the exhibits. That's number 66 of the witnesses testifying concerning. And do you see this area right there of swelling? From this ridge here down to this ridge. Can you see that?
It's hard to tell in this picture from a side view.
Okay. Can you see this injury here? And can you identify what that is?
Objection as to leading from this aspect, in terms of testifying, Mr. O'Mara testifying his injuries there without this witness saying there is.
Okay, sustained as to the word injury.
Okay,
Rephrase your question.
I will. Can you see anything in this area that I'm circling?
There appears to be an abrasion there.
And again, an abrasion consistent with that head being hit on concrete?
It can be consistent with that, yes.
And that was 68, Your Honor, if I didn't identify it. Now looking at State's Exhibit 69, let me ask you to pay attention to this area right here. Is that the abrasion that you were identifying earlier?
It appears to be the same.
And just to the, going back, can you see that as an area of swelling as well?
It does appear to be swelling. Unfortunately, some of that you have to take into account on a physical exam of how that area feels during the time. So it's difficult to get in a picture. You have
And-
certain head shapes as well.
Okay. And again, with this may well have resolved itself in the 12 hours or so between when the picture was taken and when you saw him. Correct.
It could potentially have, yes.
And do you see similar, what do you see up in this area on the, what would be above his left eye? Can you
It's
see that?
slightly shaded, but possibly another abrasion up there as well.
And can we see then the lacerations in the area around the lacerations on this side?
I can see those, yes.
Can you see, is that the area that we talked about before with the misshapen skull
It appears to
at the
be.
top? Now let's look at this side to orient to this State's Exhibit 70 and his right side of his skull, correct?
Okay.
What do you see, what is here?
Again, it looks like it could be some swelling with the abrasions that we noted before.
And how about this area up here, additional?
Additional abrasions.
Would that abrasion itself come from its own strike upon something?
That would be hard to determine.
And how about the one up here
Again, it would be difficult to determine if it was from its own
and
strike.
the one over here?
Same thing.
Do we get now a better view of the misshapen area on the back of his skull from this perspective?
There appears to be possible swelling there or the misshape of his skull itself.
I think we testified to, and this is State's Exhibit 71, you've testified to these areas and also this bruising up here, correct?
Correct.
If I might, Exhibit 74, this is a close-up of the area of the lacerations. Can you better describe for me what you see here as far as additional areas of swelling around the lacerations?
There appears to be swelling around the lacerations, which would be consistent with the trauma that elicited the laceration itself.
Meaning that whatever caused the laceration was also at the same time the sort of compression injury that we talked about earlier, where you're
It could, and that could cause the swelling, correct?
consistent, all of it, with being hit on concrete, is it not?
It could be consistent, yes.
If the complaint was that that head was hit on concrete, would you consider that consistent with the injuries that you see?
I would.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, for the advice. Thank you. Now let's spend just a minute on the report itself. Mr. De La Rionda had already gone over it, so I'm just going to hit some high points on it, if I might. His vital signs: blood pressure 130/80.
Correct?
A concern for a 28-year-old,
Slightly high on the systolic side, but from what I remember in the past, he's never had a problem with high blood pressure before.
but not a good high blood pressure, right? You'd like to see it lower.
Ideally, we like to see it 120/80 or less, but I wouldn't be a cause of concern at 130.
Pulse at 109,
That is high. Ideally, we see this around 70 to 80.
evidencing what to you?
That an increased pulse rate can be related to stress or to trauma. It can also be related to multiple other things, something to do with your heart, causing some sort of cardiac condition.
Super stressed.
Nonetheless, again, not in top shape, huh?
It's not what we would like it to be.
And how about the BMI?
The BMI is 31.48.
Oh,
And
Meaning
again,
that he is clinically obese.
correct, based on BMI classification.
And again, not healthy,
George.
Ideally, that's not the healthy range, normally between 19 to 25 or 26.
not athletic.
It doesn't necessarily mean someone's not athletic with a BMI of 31. It just means it's not at the ideal range of what the standards of health for BMI would be.
And you've gone through
Sure.
the actual injuries that you identified. We talked for a moment about the SI injury.
Correct.
Is that injury consistent with falling on your back, or I guess in the buttocks area, did you say?
It can be, yes,
When you get that type of SI pain. SI is
Sacroiliac? correct.
and that's basically at the base of your spine.
It's not necessarily right at the base of your spine. Your spine comes down in a straight. It would be where each side of the buttocks are. It would be directly in the center of that. So you have one on each side.
And how does a injury like that occur?
An SI joint injury can occur through trauma or through a fall. Sometimes people have SI joints from an improper stretching technique or through some sort of athletic type of performance.
He had reported to you that he was hit in the nose, correct?
Correct.
By his attacker.
Correct.
Is that consistent with the picture I showed you here of his nose or nasal injuries? Is that consistent with getting punched in the nose?
That would be consistent.
And is the SI injury that he talked to you about consistent with being thrown on the ground on your back?
It would be consistent.
The only way to really identify whether or not a nose is, quote, broken is with an X-ray, correct?
That would be the definitive way to decide if there was a nasal fracture.
It would be a bit easier for you to be conclusive in the determination of broken nose if you actually saw a complete septal deviation, right?
Clinically, if there was more of a septal deviation, then there could possibly be a more definitive answer to that.
So if the whole nose was literally pointed off in one direction or the other, pretty obvious that there's a break, correct?
Correct.
But short of that, then you would need to have an X-ray in order to get that accomplished.
Correct.
And that was the reason why you had referred him to an ENT,
Correct.
to document what you could not document in your office.
Correct.
You don't do nose or nasal or face head and X-rays in the office.
We do
correct?
not. It's not in our scope of practice.
And did he tell you that he wasn't going to go to the ENT because of the high deductible on his insurance policy?
I don't recall there being a discussion over a cost or deductible.
Do you remember him talking to you about what it would cost for that type of evaluation?
I don't recall that.
Is that something that you would have noted or just a conversation with him?
He may have had that in a conversation that I don't recall. It also wouldn't change my opinion of where to send him or to not send him.
And you were firm in your opinion of a couple of things. One, that he needed to see an ENT for the
Correct.
nose injury,
Correct.
even though it was reduced to the better than the cleaned up picture we looked at, right?
Correct.
Because that went from this picture to that picture in 4 hours,
Mhm.
and you had another 12 hours of the swelling to go down.
Correct.
But even still, you wanted an ENT consult.
Yes, because there can be residual effects of a nasal fracture if it's not taken care of.
And you also suggested, based upon the conversation you had with him, that he should get a psychological consult, correct?
Correct.
Why is that?
He was already seeing a psychologist. And in my professional opinion, if someone is to go through the sort of ordeal that he went through the night before of what he's telling me, then I would recommend that anybody go see a psychologist.
Did he come across to you as though he was trying to make certain that you would document his injuries consistent with being attacked?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Was he just reporting the symptoms as they seem to exist?
Yes.
He wasn't, from your perspective, he wasn't trying to use you as some shill to come up with an excuse or a reason or a medical reason for his injuries, was he?
It did not appear that way.
Was, in fact, all of his complaints documented by your evaluation?
They were.
And those injuries actually did exist, correct?
They did.
And in addition, the psychological concern that you had, in your professional opinion, that existed as well, didn't it?
It did, and that would have existed for anybody who came in with what he was concerned about or what had taken place that night.
Particularly as documented or supported by the injuries that he showed or exhibited to you.
Supported by that.
What we didn't note in the cleaned up picture, you know the one I'm talking about when I say that?
Yes.
We didn't note any black eyes on that picture, did you?
I didn't notice them from the picture. No.
So tell me, as the body begins to heal itself, we know that it rushes to the area of trauma, as you said, right?
Correct.
And then it sort of recedes.
Correct.
Well, what's the timeline on those eyes to go black?
Sometimes the black eyes can become more apparent at a later date. That's not necessarily an initial event that happens. Most of the time swelling comes to the area then the swelling may recede, and then something like the black eyes can occur after that.
Because the black eyes are actually residual blood that has escaped the capillaries and just sort of pools in the soft pockets of the under the eyes, right?
Correct.
So you don't expect to see a black eye a moment or 10 minutes or an hour even after a punch in the nose, do you?
Not necessarily that quickly.
But is it consistent that if he had gotten a punch in the nose, let's say 7:16 the night before, that when you saw him 11 a.m. in the morning, that his eyes were blackened?
They could be, yeah. It was consistent with what I saw in my physical exam.
And they were, in fact, jet black eyes, correct?
They were.
I mentioned a moment ago, was he trying to sort of somehow make up or document significant injuries? And I think you said he wasn't.
Not from the impression that I had.
On the other side, was he trying to even minimize his injuries and get it behind him? Did you get any of that feel with him telling you he wasn't going to an ENT and he just wanted a note to get back to work?
I don't recall that per se, him having that certain effect.
And Mr. De Leon asked you about the bandage. Obviously, you were taking that off. Did that seem to be an appropriate bandaging to do for that injury?
That was fine, given that the skin edges were well approximated and the scalp lacerations were not that deep. I didn't feel like if you're referring to something like a butterfly bandage or a butterfly stitch, was necessary at the time.
Right. It wasn't, you didn't look at that bandage like when we're kids or something and just have a little cut in a 4-inch by 4-inch bandage. You didn't look at that and wonder why would someone put a bandage that size on 2 injuries of that size, did you?
No.
Did it seem appropriate that it be bandaged?
Yeah, it was appropriate to keep the lacerations covered.
And particularly, let's say if it was a nursing student who was looking at that injury, would it make sense as a nursing student to cover an open wound?
Yes.
Speculation.
I'll probably phrase it.
Thank you.
If you saw those wounds on the back of the head, you know what I'm talking about? If you saw those wounds, would you clean them off and put bandages over them?
I would likely have them cleaned, and if the patient desired, I would put a bandage over them. It doesn't necessarily have to be bandaged, but there would be no problem with doing that to keep certain debris out of the area.
Right. And we talked a bit about what happens when you fall down, and Mr. De Leon used himself as a model, and I might use myself as a model, that I may not get as injured because I have hair than someone who doesn't have hair. Is that?
I don't know if that would necessarily be true. I guess it would depend on the thickness of your hair.
Okay.
But I don't think that you would be any less injured based off having hair or not having hair.
Okay. It would be more apparent with somebody who back then didn't have hair to cover the injuries, but the injuries are what they are, correct?
They are what they are, yes.
And certainly, whoever may have inflicted those injuries knew how much hair was on the body that they were inflicting the injuries upon, correct?
That's just speculation.
Did you ask Mr. Zimmerman if he had cut his hair in the past 14 hours?
I had not asked that question.
I'm going to have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you very much for your time, Your Honor. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
You mentioned something that I was curious about. You were talking about the shape of the head.
Yes,
I guess we all think the head is perfectly shaped, our skull. Is that always true?
it's not necessarily always
Tell me a
true.
little bit about that if you could.
Everybody's head shape is completely different. Obviously, most people you don't notice because they have hair on their head, so it depends on what that may look like. But everybody can have certain abnormalities of the skull.
So in other words, people may have a bump there just pre-existing and it may not be caused by trauma.
It could be, correct.
Right. So you had an opportunity, you were showing a lot of photographs. Can you pull those up? Sorry. It's still right. Oh, it is? Okay, just go back. Okay. You were showing a lot of photographs. I'm gonna go through them real quickly. You're not saying that those were all stuff that occurred the day before or the night before, all that, are you?
It would be hard to determine that based off just a photo. Most of that will be based off physical exam as well.
Thank you. I think I'm through with the photographs, Your Honor. And my point is, you actually saw him as a live person. In other words, you actually looked at his head.
Correct.
Right? You looked at his head and he had less hair than Mr. Guy here, but you looked, I'm assuming you didn't just kind of glance. You actually looked at his head.
Correct.
Right? To examine.
Correct.
And all you saw in your examination was 2 lacerations, correct?
That was all I noted.
I'm saying you didn't see it. You didn't document any other stuff that we've been talking about, all this trauma. You didn't notice that at all.
At the time, that wasn't documented. I don't recall if there was some swelling that I didn't possibly put in my note.
Okay. At this time, do you recall, or at that time, did you notate any other swelling other than the lacerations?
Those were the only 2 things that I noted.
Okay. So, and by the way, you mentioned if it could, let's speculate and say that those were all trauma caused, hematomas or whatever. Those were apparently cleaned up by the time they saw you, right? By the time he saw you the next day?
The swelling was minimized, yes.
Okay. So what that took place basically was what, maybe an aspirin or 2 or Tylenol or 2 or what, or it just did naturally?
Depends, the body will help to react naturally, and then also depends on what sort of, again, exogenous things you may be using.
So you're not saying that that is severe trauma in any way?
I don't know if I would say it's not severe or not. I mean, he does have 2 scalp lacerations, and I'm basing that off what his complaints are when he comes in.
His
So-
history, in other words.
Exactly.
But you only notated 2 lacerations in the whole thing.
Those are the only things that I documented, yes.
And I apologize. You notated also his nose, but I'm talking about the back of his head, all his skull. You only noticed 2 actual lacerations.
Those were the things I was looking for the most because those were the things that we discussed personally.
And you did the whole exam in terms of nausea, or I'm sorry, about dizziness, being able to be whether he's conscious or not. You ruled all of those out. No trauma to the head, correct?
I'm ruling those out based on what he's telling me, and then I then base that off my physical exam, depending on his neurological exam to make sure all of that seems appropriate.
And so you ruled all that out.
It seemed like he was neurologically intact.
Stop
yes.
saying.
So he didn't have any
You
brain
ruled all
injury, is
that.
what I'm going to.
There doesn't mean that you can't have a brain injury, meaning a concussion from a trauma, but it did not appear to be anything that would require imaging because he wasn't complaining of those specific symptoms.
And you also did not notice any, or you didn't.
Sorry, Rick, can you rephrase the
No.
question?
He gave you a history in terms of no, he wasn't complaining of trauma to his head, correct?
Exactly. He did complain of trauma to his head, meaning he had the lacerations.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Other than that,
And again, the story that he told me of his head being struck against the ground. So he did complain of head trauma. But from what I'm looking at based on my physical exam and doing his neurological testing, everything appeared to be intact. And because of that, I didn't order the additional testing.
because if you had noted something, you would have ordered additional testing.
At the time, exactly. I also mentioned that what are the signs to look for should something like that occur? And if that were to occur, then additional testing would be ordered.
And you never required any, is that correct?
I was never notified of anything as a change.
Okay. So did any of the injuries require anything for treatment other than minor cleaning, et cetera?
For the most part, they required cleaning to the area. And then again, we don't know the definitive diagnosis of the nasal fracture, which may have required additional treatment, but that was not completed.
And you recommended that he go to an ENT and he told you he wasn't going.
At the time, from what I recall, yes, he was not going to go.
And Mr. Romero asked you about that he said, or possibly said, that he didn't have insurance. You don't recall that, him ever saying that, do you?
I don't recall that discussion.
And I think you notated already, but you did note in your records as to, I'm sorry, February 27th, that he came in because he needed a note for work. Is that correct?
Correct.
He didn't come into your office and say, God, I've got all these head injuries. I can't think. I can't walk. I can't function. He didn't come in complaining about that, did he?
The major concern that was taken by the medical assistant was that he needed, of what happened, and then that he needed the return for work. Yes.
You mentioned also that in terms of psychological, that you suggested, but that he was also already seeing a psychologist. Is that correct?
He was already established with the psychologist. Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have a moment. Going back to August 19, 2011, I don't know if I removed that document. That was the first time you would have had contact with him.
Correct.
Mr. Zimmerman talked about his exercise routine, that he was taking mixed martial arts classes, right?
Correct.
Your Honor, that would be outside the scope of cross-examination, and this is incorrect.
Sustained.
Thank you.
I'll be glad to approach the bench regarding something that I want to show her.
No.
It's brought up in cross-examination, so it's outside the scope.
Yes, Your Honor.
Uh-huh.
You'll be approaching the bench,
Yes, you
no
may.
matter.
Oh. No, you may not. Tell him no, like you tell the other guy no.
Actually, what Mrs. Zimmerman said to you, not that he had done MMA 3 times a week, or what he said was aerobics, right?
That is what is written on the sheet. Correct.
Okay.
But then I go ahead and go in more detail with the patient when they're back in the office.
But when he talked about doing this type, we're talking about aerobic exercise, are we not?
When I would ask him what type of aerobic exercise, then mixed martial arts would have been mentioned.
And medically speaking, would you agree that whatever he did to stop the attack allowed him to survive it?
It could have potentially. Yeah, it depends on the amount of trauma he was sustaining at the time.
So stopping the attack is what allowed him to survive it. Would you agree?
It could have, yes.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
Would you agree that's pure speculation on your part?
I wasn't there at the time of the event, so I don't know the exact trauma that took place.
Thank you very much.
Okay, may Ms. Folgate be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. You are excused. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to recess for the evening and for the weekend. So while we're in recess until Monday morning at 9 a.m.
Good Lord. Okay. This one is over with. It's done. Day 5 is over. We're done. We're on to day 6. We're almost halfway through. Okay. Started out strong. Ended in a shit show of whatever this was. I don't know. All right. So we are gonna just say our good nights and goodbyes and good mornings and wherever you are in your day. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, do all of the things so I can keep on with the keeping on. yeah, I don't know. I don't have much to say after this one. I'm still not seeing a whole lot of state presenting a whole lot of premeditation, or I guess you don't have to have premeditation, but any type of ill intent. Like he went to confront him and see what he was doing, and then shit went sideways, like I said. It was an unfortunate occurrence, and it sucks. Like, how many times does stuff like that happen? Like, all the time. And I don't know. So, anywho, okay. Well, next one we will be on to day 6 of this wonderful thing. Okay, we all have a good day, good night, good evening, good afternoon. Peace out.